The woman he tried to erase. Sebastian Cole's $50 million empire crumbled the moment his ex-wife walked into his birthday party. He'd erased her from patents, interviews, and investor decks, buried her genius under his name for 3 years. Tonight, she stood across his rooftop terrace in a black dress, flanked by the one billionaire whose investment could trigger a clause Sebastian thought he'd buried forever. When Dominic Vale kissed her in front of 200 witnesses, Sebastian finally understood. The woman he'd discarded hadn't just survived, she'd been waiting, and now she owned him. If you want to see how a stolen algorithm, a hidden equity clause, and one ruthless investor brought a tech mogul to his knees, stay with me until the end. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The terrace glowed like a constellation pulled down to earth. String lights crisscrossed the rooftop venue 40 stories above the city, casting warm amber across marble tables laden with champagne towers and elaborate floral arrangements that must have cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sebastian Cole stood at the center of it all, a glass of Dom Perignon in one hand, his other arm draped possessively around his new wife's waist. Maya smiled up at him with practiced adoration, her diamond necklace catching the light in calculated flashes. To another year of unprecedented growth, Marcus Chen, Sebastian's CFO, announced, raising his glass toward the crowd of investors, tech journalists, and industry elites who'd gathered to celebrate Sebastian's 35th birthday. And to the visionary who built Logistream from a struggling startup into the most sophisticated logistics platform in North America. The crowd erupted in applause. Sebastian inclined his head with the perfect blend of humility and pride he'd perfected over 3 years of keynote speeches and magazine profiles. Forbes had called him a disruptive genius. TechCrunch labeled him the algorithm whisperer. Wall Street analysts projected Logistream's valuation would hit $500 million within 18 months. None of them knew the algorithm wasn't his. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Sebastian began, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place at the top. "When I started Logistream in that warehouse in Brooklyn, working 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot between server racks, I had one vision: to revolutionize how goods move through the world, to bring predictive intelligence to an industry drowning in inefficiency." He paused for effect, letting the mythology settle over his audience like expensive cologne. "Tonight, I'm thrilled to announce that Vision has attracted some extraordinary interest. We have special guests joining us." That's when he saw her. Sebastian's words died mid-sentence. His hand tightened around the champagne flute until his knuckles went white. Across the terrace, near the north entrance where late arrivals filtered through security, stood a woman in a black dress that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant twist. She wore no jewelry except small diamond studs, the ones he'd given her for their first anniversary, back when they'd still been partners in every sense of the word. Ariana. No, not Ariana anymore. She'd changed her name after the divorce. Blake. Ariana Blake. As if she could shed their shared history by shedding his surname. What the hell was she doing here? Maya touched his arm, her smile faltering. "Sebastian? Are you all right?" He forced himself to breathe, to redirect his attention to the crowd that was beginning to notice his uncharacteristic silence. "I'm fine. Just give me a moment." But he wasn't fine. His heart hammered against his ribs as he watched Ariana move through the crowd with quiet confidence. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't looking at the stage or the elaborate ice sculptures or the celebrity DJ setting up near the bar. Her attention was fixed on someone else entirely. Dominic Vale. The billionaire investor stood near the western edge of the terrace, his silver hair and impeccably tailored suit making him instantly recognizable even in a crowd of wealthy tech elites. Vale Capital had built empires and buried competitors with equal efficiency. One investment from Dominic Vale could catapult a company into the stratosphere. One negative assessment could crater valuations overnight. Sebastian had been courting Vale's attention for 6 months. Carefully orchestrated meetings, meticulously prepared presentations, strategic introductions through mutual connections. He'd been trying to position Logistream for Vale Capital's next major investment round. And now Ariana was walking straight toward him. Sebastian shoved his champagne glass at Marcus and started moving through the crowd, his birthday celebration forgotten. He had to intercept her before she said something, before she ruined everything he'd built. But the terrace was packed with bodies, and by the time he'd navigated past a cluster of venture capitalists debating valuation metrics, Ariana had already reached Dominic. The billionaire's face transformed when he saw her. Not the polite interest he'd shown Sebastian during their carefully scheduled meetings, but genuine warmth, recognition. He took both her hands in his, leaning close to speak words Sebastian couldn't hear over the music and conversation. Then Dominic kissed her cheek. Not a business greeting, not a casual acknowledgement between acquaintances. The gesture carried intimacy, familiarity, history. "Who is that?" Maya had followed him through the crowd, her voice tight with the particular strain of a woman watching her husband stare at another woman. "No one," Sebastian said automatically. "An old employee. I'll handle it." But Maya wasn't stupid. She'd seen his face when he spotted Ariana. "That's her, isn't it? Your ex-wife." Sebastian didn't answer. He was already moving again, closing the distance between himself and the conversation that could unravel everything. "Sebastian." Dominic's voice stopped him 3 feet away. The older man turned, his expression pleasant but utterly unreadable. "I was just about to find you. I'd like to introduce you to someone very important." Sebastian's jaw clenched. "We've met." "Have you?" Dominic's eyebrows rose with manufactured surprise. "How fascinating. Ariana, you didn't mention you knew our host." Ariana finally looked at Sebastian directly. Her eyes were the same deep brown he remembered, but something in them had changed, hardened. She smiled, and it was the polite, distant expression she'd give a stranger. "It was a long time ago," she said quietly. "Ancient history." "Not that ancient," Sebastian bit out. "What are you doing here, Ariana?" "Ms. Blake is my guest," Dominic interjected smoothly. "I hope that's not a problem." Everything was a problem. Ariana at his party. Ariana with Dominic Vale. Ariana looking at him like he was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle in her evening. "Of course not," Sebastian forced himself to say. "Any friend of Mr. Vale's is welcome." "Wonderful." Dominic's smile widened. "Because I have some news I think you'll find very exciting. Is there somewhere we could speak privately, perhaps with your legal team present?" Sebastian's pulse kicked up. This was it. The investment he'd been chasing. Vale Capital ready to inject the kind of money that would cement Logistream's dominance, that would push their valuation past every competitor, that would prove once and for all that Sebastian Cole belonged at the very top of the tech world. "Absolutely. My office is just through—" "Actually," Ariana interrupted softly, "I think the announcement should be public. Don't you, Dominic?" The billionaire considered her for a moment, then nodded. "You're right, as always. These moments should be celebrated properly." Sebastian felt the ground shift beneath him, some tectonic instability he couldn't quite identify. What announcement? But Dominic was already moving toward the stage, gesturing for the DJ to cut the music. The crowd quieted, sensing something significant about to unfold. Maya appeared at Sebastian's elbow, her expression carefully neutral despite the tension radiating from every line of her body. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dominic's voice carried across the terrace with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and bending markets to his will. "I apologize for interrupting this lovely celebration, but I have news that I believe Mr. Cole will want to share with all of you." Sebastian climbed the stage steps on autopilot, his mind racing through possibilities. A partnership, a major investment, Vale Capital taking a significant equity position in Logistream. This should be his moment of triumph. So why did Ariana look like she was watching a carefully orchestrated play reach its final act? "As many of you know," Dominic continued, "I've been evaluating opportunities in the logistics technology sector for the better part of a year. The right platform, the right team, the right innovation. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that Vale Capital is making a $65 million strategic investment in Logistream Technologies." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Investors surged forward, already calculating what this meant for their own positions. Marcus was shouting something about champagne and celebration. Maya threw her arms around Sebastian's neck, squealing with delight. But Sebastian couldn't move, couldn't breathe. $65 million. The number echoed in his head like a death knell. Not because it wasn't extraordinary, it was more than he dared hope for, but because of what it triggered. A clause buried in divorce paperwork he'd signed 3 years ago, hidden among hundreds of pages of asset division and settlement terms. A clause his lawyers had assured him would never matter because it required a specific threshold that seemed impossibly high at the time. Any single capital investment exceeding $50 million would automatically activate Ariana's equity position. 18%. His ex-wife, who'd walked away with almost nothing in the divorce, who'd let him keep the company and the patents and the glory, had just become Logistream's second largest shareholder. Sebastian's vision tunneled. The celebration around him became distant, muffled, like he was underwater. He searched the crowd for Ariana and found her standing exactly where he'd left her, near the edge of the terrace. She wasn't celebrating. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Dominic was still talking, something about innovation and market disruption and the future of logistics. Sebastian forced himself to focus, to smile, to play the role of grateful entrepreneur even as his world imploded. "There's one more thing I'd like to address tonight," Dominic said, and Sebastian's stomach dropped. "Something that I believe this industry and this company needs to acknowledge." The billionaire pulled a tablet from his jacket pocket and tapped the screen. Behind him, the massive display screen that had been cycling through images of Logistream's success suddenly changed. Code filled the screen. Not current production code, but something older. Development files from the earliest days of the company. "The adaptive routing engine that powers Logistream," Dominic said, his voice carrying a new edge. "The predictive algorithm that revolutionized logistics efficiency and made this company what it is today. That innovation has a very specific origin." He tapped the screen again. File metadata appeared, showing creation dates, modification history, author information. And there, embedded in line after line of code, was a name Sebastian had spent 3 years trying to erase. A. Cole. Developer comments. Architecture design. System logic. Ariana. The brilliant engineer who built this system, Dominic continued, his eyes finding Sebastian's, who spent 18 months developing the core technology while this company hemorrhaged money and investors fled, that person was never properly credited. The crowd had gone silent. Phones were out now, recording everything. Tech journalists were typing furiously. Investors were exchanging glances that ranged from confused to calculating. "Ariana Blake," Dominic said, gesturing toward her, formerly Ariana Cole, was the primary architect of the technology that made Logistream valuable. Her code, her vision, her sleepless nights, and revolutionary approach to predictive modeling. Sebastian's hands clenched at his sides. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. When Sebastian Cole presented to his first major investors, Dominic continued relentlessly, he failed to mention that the breakthrough they were investing in came from his wife's genius. When patents were filed, her name was mysteriously absent. When press coverage exploded, she was relegated to footnotes and acknowledgments, when she was mentioned at all. "That's not," Sebastian started, but Dominic cut him off with a raised hand. "I have the original development files," the billionaire said quietly. "Git repositories with complete commit history, design documents with metadata, email chains and internal memos. I've spent 3 months verifying the truth of this company's origin story, and it's very different from the mythology that's been sold to investors and the press." Ariana started moving through the crowd, and people parted for her like she was royalty. She climbed the stage steps with quiet grace, stopping beside Dominic. This close, Sebastian could see the steel beneath her composed exterior. "I'm not here for revenge," she said, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes locked on her. "I'm here for recognition, for the record to reflect reality, for my contributions to be acknowledged rather than erased." "You signed the divorce settlement," Sebastian hissed, forgetting they had an audience. "You took the payout. You agreed to walk away." "I agreed to a settlement that included an equity clause," Ariana corrected. "A clause your lawyers drafted that you signed that becomes enforceable upon certain conditions." She looked at Dominic. "Conditions that were met approximately 10 minutes ago." The investors were calculating now. Sebastian could see it happening in real time. The reassessment of risk, the revaluation of assets, the sudden realization that the company's ownership structure had fundamentally changed. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "Sebastian, we need to talk. Now." But there was nowhere to hide, no conference room or private office that could contain this. The truth was spilling out in front of 200 witnesses, and every second was being recorded, photographed, documented for the industry to dissect. Vail Capital's investment, Dominic said, was contingent on this truth coming to light. "I don't invest in companies built on stolen credit, but I do invest in brilliant minds who've been systematically undervalued." He turned to Ariana with something close to pride. "Ariana has consulted with me for the past 8 months, helping Vail Capital evaluate opportunities in logistics technology. Her insights have been invaluable. When she told me her story, when she showed me the evidence of her work being claimed by someone else, I knew exactly what kind of investment this needed to be." Sebastian felt Maya's hand slip from his arm, felt the weight of every gaze in the crowd, felt 3 years of carefully constructed mythology crumbling like sand. "The investment announcement stands," Dominic continued. "But moving forward, this company will acknowledge its true origins. Board meetings will reflect accurate equity positions. Press materials will credit the correct innovators." His expression hardened. "And if there's any attempt to circumvent or challenge Miss Blake's contractual rights, Vail Capital will withdraw not just this investment, but our support in every future funding round." It was a checkmate delivered with surgical precision. Sebastian could fight, hire lawyers, challenge the clause, tie everything up in litigation. But Dominic Vail had the resources to bury him, and more importantly, had the influence to ensure no other major investor would touch Logistream. The crowd was murmuring now, the shock giving way to frantic speculation. Some investors were already moving toward the exits, phones pressed to their ears as they called their firms to reassess positions. Tech journalists were drafting headlines in real time. The birthday celebration had transformed into something else entirely, a public reckoning. "I should have fought harder," Ariana said quietly, and for a moment she was speaking only to Sebastian, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of silence. "I should have refused to sign anything that erased my work. I should have demanded proper credit from the beginning." She paused, and her eyes were fierce. "But I was exhausted, heartbroken. I wanted out of a marriage where my husband saw me as a threat to his personal brand rather than a partner." "That's not fair," Sebastian said, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "Fair?" Ariana's laugh was bitter. "You stood on stages and accepted awards for work I did. You gave interviews about your creative process when the only thing you created was the narrative that wrote me out of existence. You built an empire on my algorithm and convinced yourself you deserved it." "I grew the company," Sebastian shot back. "I secured funding. I handled investors and press and business development. You wrote code." "I wrote the code that made any of that possible," Ariana corrected. "And you know it. That's why you buried my name, why you made sure patents listed you as sole inventor, why you told investors the breakthrough came during your all-night coding sessions, when the truth is you can barely write a functional loop." The crowd was drinking in every word. This was better than any keynote, more dramatic than any product launch. This was real blood in the water, and the sharks were circling. Marcus grabbed Sebastian's elbow, his voice urgent. "We need to get you off this stage, now, before you say something that creates legal liability." But Sebastian couldn't move. He was trapped in the spotlight, in the moment, in the consequences of decisions he'd made 3 years ago when he'd convinced himself that one name on the patents didn't matter, that investors wanted a singular visionary rather than a team, that his wife would understand why he needed to be the face of their innovation. "I loved you," Ariana said, and her voice cracked slightly. "I loved you when we were eating ramen in that warehouse because we couldn't afford real meals, when we were debugging code at 3 in the morning, when investors laughed us out of pitch meetings. I loved you through all of it." She drew a shaky breath. "And then you stood on that stage, the stage where we were supposed to present together, and you told our story like I was never there, like the technology materialized from your genius alone." "You never wanted the spotlight," Sebastian protested. "You hated public speaking. You told me you preferred working in the background." "I preferred collaboration," Ariana corrected. "I preferred partnership. I never asked to be invisible." Her voice strengthened. But that's what you made me. Invisible. Forgettable. A footnote in your success story. Dominic checked his watch with deliberate casualness. The press release goes out in 15 minutes. It details the investment, the equity structure, and the correction of historical attribution. Every major tech outlet will have it simultaneously. He looked at Sebastian. You can fight this, of course. Hire lawyers, challenge the clause, drag everyone through litigation, but the truth is already out there. He gestured to the crowd of recording phones. And Vail Capital's support is contingent on this company operating with integrity going forward. Sebastian's mind raced through options, through strategies, through any possible way to contain this disaster. But every path led to the same conclusion. He'd been outmaneuvered. Ariana hadn't just shown up at his party. She'd engineered this entire revelation with the precision of someone who'd learned from watching him manipulate narratives for 3 years. How long have you been planning this? Sebastian asked quietly. Ariana met his gaze without flinching. Since the day I signed the divorce papers. Since the moment I realized you'd never voluntarily give me credit. Since I accepted that the only way to reclaim my work was to build a path back in. She glanced at Dominic. I just needed the right partner. Someone who valued truth over mythology. Someone who could write a check big enough to trigger that clause, Sebastian said bitterly. Someone who believed my contributions deserved recognition, Ariana corrected. The money was always going to come eventually. Your algorithm, my algorithm, is too valuable for serious investors to ignore. I just made sure that when it did, the truth came with it. Maya appeared at the edge of the stage, her face carefully blank. Sebastian, people are leaving. The party's over, Sebastian said flatly. He looked at the crowd, at the investors who were already calculating how this changed their positions, at the journalists who were crafting narratives about stolen genius and corporate deception. I think everyone got what they came for. Dominic descended from the stage first, offering his hand to Ariana with old-world courtesy. She took it, and together they walked through the crowd toward the exit. Conversation stopped as they passed, then exploded into frantic whispers the moment they were out of earshot. Sebastian stood alone on the stage, his birthday celebration in ruins around him, watching the woman he'd erased walk out of his life for the second time. Except this time she was taking half his company with her. Marcus climbed onto the stage, his expression grim. Legal is already pulling the divorce settlement. If that clause is as airtight as Vail seems to think, it is, Sebastian said quietly. I remember signing it. My lawyer said it would never trigger because no investor would write a check that big for a company our size. Well, one just did. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. This changes everything. Board composition, voting rights, strategic direction. If Ariana and Vail align their positions, they already have, Sebastian interrupted. That's what this was. A corporate takeover disguised as truth-telling. Can we fight it? Sebastian watched Ariana disappear into the elevator, Dominic's hand resting protectively on her lower back. We can try. But Dominic Vail doesn't make moves like this unless he's already 20 steps ahead. He'll have anticipated every legal challenge, every possible counter-strategy. He laughed bitterly. I taught Ariana to think that way, to see 10 moves ahead, to plan for every contingency. You taught her too well, Marcus muttered. The irony wasn't lost on Sebastian. He'd spent 3 years building an empire on Ariana's code, and in the process, he'd taught her exactly how empires were built, and exactly how they could be reclaimed. The terrace was emptying now, investors making polite excuses, journalists rushing to file stories, guests who'd come for celebration finding themselves witnesses to a very public downfall. Maya stood near the bar, her diamond necklace catching the light, looking lost in a party that had become something entirely different from what she'd expected. Sebastian descended from the stage and walked to the edge of the terrace, looking out over the city lights. 40 stories below, life continued, cars moving through streets, people going about their evenings, completely unaware that in this glittering penthouse, everything had just changed. His phone buzzed. A notification from TechCrunch. Breaking, Logistream founder's dark secret, how Sebastian Cole built an empire on stolen code. It had already started. The narrative he'd spent 3 years cultivating was being dismantled in real time, replaced with a truth he'd tried so hard to bury. Maya appeared beside him, her voice small, Did you really steal her work? Sebastian didn't answer immediately. He could lie, could spin some version of events that made him sound less calculating. But what was the point? The evidence was already out there, embedded in code repositories and design documents, waiting to be analyzed and verified. I told myself it was our work, he said finally, that we built it together, that it didn't matter whose name was on the patents because we were married, we were partners. He paused. But yeah, the algorithm was hers. The breakthrough was hers. I just convinced myself I deserved credit for turning it into a business. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she removed her engagement ring, a 4-carat diamond he'd given her 6 months ago, and placed it on the terrace railing between them. I married Sebastian Cole, tech visionary, she said softly. I'm not sure who you actually are. She walked away, leaving him alone with the champagne towers and the string lights and the ruins of a celebration that was supposed to cement his place at the top of the industry. Instead, it had become the night everything he'd built started to crumble. Sebastian picked up Maya's ring, the diamond cold against his palm. Across the city, in some car or hotel or apartment, Ariana was probably celebrating her victory. She'd played the long game, spent 3 years in exile watching him claim her work, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike back. And she'd won. His phone buzzed again. Another notification, another article, another piece of his carefully constructed mythology falling apart. Sebastian pocketed the ring and headed for the exit, leaving the party behind. His birthday celebration had become his public execution, and there was nothing left to do but retreat and prepare for the war he knew was coming. Because Ariana might have won this battle, but the war for Logistream was just beginning, and Sebastian Cole hadn't built an empire by accepting defeat. Even if that empire had never really been his to begin with. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 in the morning in Logistream's downtown headquarters, a glass and steel tower that Sebastian had insisted on leasing 2 years ago when the company's valuation first crossed $100 million. He'd wanted a physical symbol of success, a monument to what he'd built. Now, sitting at the head of the conference table with 5 bleary-eyed board members staring at him like he'd personally set their investments on fire, the tower felt more like a mausoleum. Walk us through this again, Patricia Werner said, her voice carrying the particular chill of a venture capitalist who'd just watched her portfolio company implode on social media. Slowly. Because I want to make absolutely certain I understand how we went from a $65 million investment to a PR nightmare in under 12 hours. Sebastian hadn't slept. After the party collapsed, he'd spent the night in his office with Marcus and a team of lawyers poring over the divorce settlement that had seemed so inconsequential 3 years ago. The clause was exactly as Ariana and Dominic had claimed, airtight, enforceable, and now very much activated. The equity provision was buried in the settlement, Sebastian explained for the 3rd time. 18% ownership, dormant unless triggered by a single capital investment exceeding $50 million. My lawyers at the time assured me the threshold was too high to matter. Logistream was barely surviving. No investor would write a check that size. And yet Dominic Vale just did, Thomas Reeves interjected. The oldest board member, a silver-haired entrepreneur who'd built and sold 3 companies, looked more disappointed than angry. Which means your ex-wife, who you've never mentioned in 3 years of board meetings, now controls the 2nd largest equity position in this company. Technically, Marcus said from his position near the windows, she's controlled it since the divorce. The clause just required activation. That's not better, Patricia snapped. That's worse. It means we've been operating without full disclosure of our cap table. Do you have any idea what this does to our next funding round? To our IPO timeline? Sebastian's jaw tightened. The clause was in the divorce settlement, not the corporate structure. It didn't need to be disclosed. A ticking time bomb that could hand 18% of the company to someone outside the existing shareholder group absolutely needed to be disclosed, Patricia shot back. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is the story. The narrative that's currently burning through every tech publication and social media platform. She pulled up her tablet and started reading. TechCrunch. Logistream's stolen genius. How one founder erased his wife from history. What? Wired. The code she wrote. The credit he stole. Bloomberg. Inside the 3-year deception that built a tech empire. She looked up, her expression glacial. Should I continue? Because there are about 40 more just like them. It's not that simple, Sebastian protested. Ariana and I built the company together. We were married. The lines were blurred. The patents aren't blurred, Thomas said quietly. I pulled them last night. Your name. Sole inventor on every filing related to the adaptive routing engine. If Ariana contributed what these articles claim she contributed, that's not blurred lines. That's fraud. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Sebastian felt his chest constrict. It's not fraud, he said firmly. We were married. Community property. What was hers was mine and vice versa. Except you divorced her and kept everything, Patricia pointed out, which negates the community property argument. If her contributions were as significant as the development records suggest, she should have been listed on those patents, and the fact that she wasn't raises serious questions about the validity of our IP protection. Marcus cleared his throat. Our lawyers are reviewing the patent filings now. If there's any basis for challenge, there won't be, Sebastian interrupted. The patents are solid. The innovation is real. The company is built on legitimate technology. Technology that Ariana Blake apparently created, Patricia said. Which brings us back to the fundamental problem. We have a major investor who just publicly humiliated our CEO while elevating someone we've never met to second-largest shareholder status. We have a media firestorm questioning the ethical foundation of this company. And we have an equity structure that fundamentally changed overnight. She leaned forward. So I'll ask you again, Sebastian. What exactly is your plan to fix this? Sebastian had been asking himself the same question all night. Fight the clause and risk Dominic Vale pulling his investment and poisoning the well with every other major investor. Accept the clause and cede significant control to Ariana just as the company approached its most critical growth phase. Either path led to disaster. We negotiate, he said finally. Ariana wants recognition, not revenge. She said so herself. We offer her credit where credit is due, proper attribution in company materials, acknowledgement in press statements. But we make it clear that Logistream's success came from execution, not just innovation, from business development and market strategy and everything that happens after the code is written. And if she doesn't accept that narrative, Thomas asked, then we remind her that destroying the company destroys her equity value too. She's not stupid. She knows Logistream is worth more as a thriving business than as a cautionary tale about stolen credit. Patricia looked unconvinced. You're assuming she cares more about money than vindication. Based on last night's performance, I'm not sure that's a safe assumption. Before Sebastian could respond, his phone buzzed. Then Marcus's. Then every phone in the conference room simultaneously lit up with notifications. Patricia pulled up her screen, and her face went pale. You have got to be kidding me. She turned the tablet so everyone could see. A live stream was playing on Logistream's own company blog, the one Sebastian used for product announcements and company updates. Except he hadn't authorized any live stream. On screen, Ariana sat in what looked like a professional studio setup, her hair pulled back, wearing a simple gray blazer. Behind her, a screen displayed the Logistream logo. Good morning, she said, her voice calm and clear. My name is Ariana Blake, and I'm the creator of the adaptive routing algorithm that powers Logistream's logistics platform. 3 years ago, I walked away from this company and the credit I deserved. Today, I'm here to tell my story. She hacked our blog, Marcus whispered, his fingers already flying across his laptop keyboard. She's using our own platform to— Don't shut it down, Sebastian said sharply. Cutting her off midstream will make us look worse. Let her talk. On screen, Ariana continued. I met Sebastian Cole 8 years ago at a tech meetup in Brooklyn. We bonded over our frustration with inefficient logistics systems, over the conviction that predictive algorithms could revolutionize supply chain management. We fell in love. We got married, and together, we started building what would become Logistream. She paused, and the screen behind her changed, showing photos from those early days. Sebastian and Ariana in a warehouse, surrounded by servers and whiteboards, young and exhausted and convinced they were going to change the world. For 18 months, I worked on the core technology while Sebastian handled business development, Ariana continued. I built the predictive modeling system. I designed the adaptive routing engine. I wrote the code that could analyze real-time traffic, weather, demand patterns, and hundreds of other variables to optimize delivery routes with unprecedented accuracy. The screen showed code snippets, design documents, commit histories, all time-stamped, all bearing Ariana's digital signature. When we finally had a working prototype, Sebastian suggested we pitch investors together. But when the day came, he told me he wanted to present alone. He said investors prefer a singular vision, a single face to bet on. He promised I'd get credit. He promised we'd be partners in everything. Her voice remained steady, but Sebastian could hear the hurt beneath it. He presented our technology as his breakthrough. In interviews, he talked about all-night coding sessions where he revolutionized logistics. At conferences, he accepted awards for innovation. And when patents were filed, my name was nowhere to be found. Patricia looked at Sebastian. Is any of that untrue? Sebastian's hands clenched under the table. It's selective truth. She's leaving out context. Then provide context, Thomas said. Because right now, she's controlling the narrative. On screen, Ariana's expression hardened. I confronted Sebastian about the patents. He told me it was for the company's good, that investors wanted simplicity, that we could correct the record later. I believed him. I stayed quiet. And over the next 2 years, I watched him build a mythology around himself while I became increasingly invisible. The screen showed magazine covers, conference posters, investor decks. Every single one featured Sebastian's face, Sebastian's quotes, Sebastian's vision. When I finally demanded proper attribution, he told me I was being unreasonable, jealous, unable to understand the bigger picture. Ariana's voice cracked slightly. So I filed for divorce. And in that divorce, I included one clause, a small equity position that would activate if the company ever achieved the kind of success Sebastian claimed was inevitable. She leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. Last night, that clause activated, and now I'm back, not to destroy what I built, but to reclaim it, to ensure that the truth is part of Logistream's story going forward. The live stream ended. The conference room sat in stunned silence. She just declared war, Patricia said quietly. On our platform, using our logo. That was a calculated move to position herself as the rightful creator while painting Sebastian as a thief. Sebastian's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it before his brain caught up with his instincts. Hello, Sebastian. Dominic Vale's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. I hope I'm not interrupting your crisis management session. What do you want, Dominic? To offer you a choice. The narrative Ariana just shared? That can be the story moving forward, a story of correction and justice. Or it can become a legal battle that consumes the next 3 years, destroys Logistream's reputation, and ensures that no serious investor ever trusts this company again. Sebastian put the phone on speaker so the board could hear. That sounds like a threat. It's a reality check, Dominic corrected. You built this company on Ariana's code. You claimed credit that wasn't entirely yours. Those are facts, Sebastian. The only question now is whether you accept them gracefully or fight them desperately. And if I accept them, what then? Ariana becomes co-CEO. I hand over control of the company I built? The company you both built, Dominic said firmly. And no, Ariana doesn't want to run Logistream day to day. She wants what she's always wanted, recognition, proper credit, a seat at the table where decisions about her technology are made. Patricia leaned toward the speakerphone. This is Patricia Werner, board member. What specifically are you proposing, Mr. Vale? A restructuring that reflects reality, Dominic replied. Ariana receives proper attribution in all company materials. Patents are amended to include her as co-inventor. She joins the board with full voting rights. And moving forward, Logistream operates with transparency about its origins. That's more than recognition, Thomas interjected. That's a fundamental shift in corporate governance. It's what should have happened 3 years ago, Dominic countered. I'm simply correcting a historical injustice. And in exchange, Vale Capital's investment stands. My influence in the industry supports Logistream's growth. And Ariana doesn't pursue legal challenges to patents that might be vulnerable to invalidation. The threat was clear. Accept the restructuring or face a legal war that could destroy the company's IP protection. We need time to consider this, Sebastian said. You have until market close today, Dominic replied. After that, Ariana and I hold a press conference detailing every instance of improper credit attribution, every patent filing that excluded her contributions, every interview where you claimed work that wasn't yours. We're prepared to be very thorough." The line went dead. Patricia looked at Sebastian with something between pity and contempt. "You really screwed this up, didn't you?" Before Sebastian could answer, Marcus's laptop chimed. The live stream has been picked up by every major outlet. Twitter's trending with hashtag Ariana Blake and hashtag stolen code. Reddit's dissecting the development files she showed. This is going viral. "How bad?" Sebastian asked. Marcus turned the laptop so he could see. The analytics were devastating. 3 million views in 20 minutes. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of Ariana, overwhelmingly damning of Sebastian. Tech influencers were weighing in, calling for Sebastian's resignation. Rival companies were making pointed statements about ethical innovation. "It's bad," Marcus said quietly. Sebastian's phone rang again. His mother this time. He declined the call. Then his sister. Then Maya's lawyer. The world was closing in from every direction. "We need to vote," Patricia said. "Dominic's offer expires at market close. We either accept the restructuring or prepare for war." She looked around the table. "All in favor of accepting Vale Capital's terms?" Thomas raised his hand immediately. 2 other board members followed after brief hesitation. Patricia kept her hand down, watching Sebastian. "All opposed?" Sebastian raised his hand. Patricia joined him. 3-2 in favor of acceptance. "Motion carries," Patricia said. "Marcus, draft acceptance terms." "Sebastian," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "You need to prepare a statement, something that acknowledges Ariana's contributions without admitting fraud or opening us up to additional legal liability." "I'm not apologizing for building this company," Sebastian said flatly. "Then you're not understanding the situation," Patricia shot back. "Your reputation is being destroyed in real time. Your leadership is being questioned. Your integrity is under scrutiny. The only way to salvage any of this is to accept responsibility with grace and redirect the narrative toward redemption rather than defensiveness." "She wants me to grovel." "She wants you to tell the truth," Thomas said quietly. "And frankly, Sebastian, you owe her that much." The board meeting dissolved into committee work. Lawyers drafting statements, PR teams crafting responses, Marcus coordinating with Vale Capital's attorneys on restructuring terms. Sebastian sat at the head of the table, watching his empire reorganize itself around the truth he'd spent 3 years denying. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it, expecting another journalist request for comment. Instead, it was from Ariana. "I know you're angry, I know you feel ambushed, but this was never about hurting you. It was about refusing to stay invisible. You taught me that empires are built on narrative. I'm just using a better one." Sebastian stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response. "You could have talked to me. We could have worked this out privately." Her reply came almost instantly. "I tried, 3 years ago. You chose your version of the story over the truth, so I built my own path back in." He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain all the reasons why he'd made the choices he'd made. But what was the point? The truth was exactly what Ariana said. He'd chosen the easier narrative, the one that made him the hero, and he'd convinced himself it didn't matter because they were building something together. Except they weren't together anymore. And the bill for that choice had finally come due. Marcus approached with a tablet. "Legal needs you to review the statement before it goes out. We're proposing acknowledgement of Ariana's contributions with emphasis on collaborative innovation and shared credit going forward." Sebastian scanned the draft. It was carefully worded, legally precise, and utterly inadequate to capture the complexity of what had actually happened. But it was also probably the best they could do without admitting actionable fraud. "Fine," he said. "Send it." "There's one more thing." Marcus hesitated. "Ariana's requesting a meeting, today. Just the 2 of you. She says there are things that need to be said privately before this goes any further." "Awesome." Sebastian laughed bitterly. "She's got a strange definition of private, considering she just broadcast her version of events to millions of people. Do you want the meeting or not?" He should say no, should maintain distance, let lawyers handle everything, refuse to give Ariana any more opportunities to outmaneuver him. But part of him, The part that remembered late nights in the warehouse, debugging code and dreaming about changing the world together, wanted to understand how they'd ended up here. Where and when? She suggested the original warehouse, the one where you started Logistream, 2 o'clock this afternoon. Of course she did. The warehouse was the one place that held memories for both of them, back when they'd been partners in every sense, before success and ego and stolen credit had destroyed everything. "Tell her I'll be there," Sebastian said. The morning dissolved into damage control. Sebastian recorded a video statement acknowledging Ariana's contributions and committing to full transparency going forward. The board approved restructuring terms that gave Ariana board representation and amended patent filings. Vale Capital issued a press release praising Logistream's commitment to ethical attribution. None of it stopped the social media firestorm. If anything, Sebastian's carefully worded acknowledgement was interpreted as too little, too late. The narrative had already solidified. Brilliant woman erased by ambitious husband, finally reclaiming her stolen legacy. Sebastian had become the villain of a story he'd thought he was writing. At 1:30, he left headquarters through the parking garage to avoid the journalists who'd gathered in the lobby. The drive to Brooklyn took 40 minutes through midday traffic. The warehouse looked smaller than he remembered, a squat brick building wedged between a coffee roaster and a furniture workshop. The Logistream sign that had hung above the entrance was long gone, replaced by a tech incubator that rented space to 3 different startups. Sebastian parked and sat in his car for several minutes, watching the building where it had all started. The dreams and late nights and desperate scrambles for funding. The moment Ariana had shown him the first working version of her algorithm, her eyes bright with exhaustion and triumph. The kiss they'd shared when the code finally ran without errors, both of them laughing with relief and joy. When had it all gone wrong? He got out of the car and walked to the entrance. The security system was different, but someone had left the door propped open. He climbed to the 3rd floor, following muscle memory more than conscious thought, and found himself standing in front of the space where Logistream had been born. The door was unlocked. Inside, Ariana waited. She'd changed since the live stream, now wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look more like the woman he'd married than the polished executive who'd delivered his public execution. She stood by the windows that overlooked the street, her arms crossed, and when she turned to face him, her expression was unreadable. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. Sebastian closed the door behind him. "Did I have a choice?" "You always have choices, Sebastian. You've just spent 3 years making the wrong ones." He walked further into the space, taking in the exposed brick and high ceilings and industrial fixtures. Another company occupied it now, but the bones were the same. "This is where you wrote the algorithm," he said, pointing to the corner where their desks had been arranged. "Right there. You wouldn't let me see the code until you were certain it worked." "Because you would have tried to optimize it before understanding what it did," Ariana replied. "You were always so focused on results that you skipped over process." Process doesn't impress investors. Neither does building companies on stolen credit, apparently. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Sebastian turned to face her fully. "Is that what you think happened? That I stole your work?" Ariana's laugh was bitter. "I think you convinced yourself that because we were married, because we were building something together, the specifics of who created what didn't matter. I think you saw an opportunity to be the singular visionary investors wanted to bet on, and you took it. And I think you told yourself enough justifications that you actually believed them." "We were partners," Sebastian protested. "Everything we built together." "I wrote the code, Sebastian. Every line. You know it. I know it. And now the whole world knows it." Ariana moved away from the window, her voice rising. "You could have shared credit. Could have presented us as a team, could have put my name on the patents alongside yours. But you didn't, because somewhere deep down, you believed your story was more valuable with just one hero." "Investors. Don't blame investors for your choices," Ariana interrupted. "Plenty of successful companies have co-founders who share credit. You chose to erase me because it was easier, because it fit the narrative you wanted to tell." Sebastian felt anger rising in his chest, hot and defensive. "And you chose to wait 3 years to destroy me publicly instead of having this conversation when it might have mattered." "I tried to have this conversation." Ariana's composure cracked. I came to you 6 months after the first investor meeting. I showed you how the press was only quoting you, how the patents listed only your name. I asked you to correct the record." Her voice shook. "And you told me I was being insecure, that I needed to focus on the work instead of worrying about credit, that we were building something bigger than individual recognition. Because we were, you were building your empire," Ariana corrected. "I was just convenient infrastructure. Code you could claim, and a wife you could marginalize until she became invisible." She drew a shaky breath. "So I left. I signed your settlement. I took almost nothing, and I included one clause that would let me back in if the company ever became what you claimed it would be. That clause was a trap." "That clause was insurance," Ariana shot back. "Protection against exactly what happened, you claiming my work and pretending I never existed." They stood 5 feet apart in the empty warehouse, 3 years of resentment and hurt filling the space between them. Sebastian wanted to defend himself, to explain all the pressures and compromises that had led to his choices. But looking at Ariana's face, seeing the pain he'd caused reflected in her eyes, the justifications died in his throat. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for the patents, for the interviews, for making you feel invisible." Ariana's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "Sorry doesn't fix 3 years of erasure, Sebastian. It doesn't restore the credit you took or the opportunities I lost, because no one knew what I'd created." "Then what do you want? Because you've already taken half my company, destroyed my reputation, and turned me into a cautionary tale. What else is left?" "The truth," Ariana said simply. "Acknowledged, permanent, part of Logistream's history in a way that can't be erased or minimized or footnoted into irrelevance." She paused. "And I want you to understand why it matters. Not for legal reasons or PR management, but because once upon a time you loved me enough to build a company together. And somewhere along the way you decided that love was less important than your image." Sebastian felt something crack inside him. "I did love you. I never stopped." "You loved the version of me that stayed quiet," Ariana corrected. "The one who worked in the background and didn't threaten your spotlight. The moment I asked for credit, I became a problem to manage rather than a partner to celebrate." She was right. He knew she was right. But admitting it meant accepting that he'd destroyed his marriage and betrayed his partner for something as hollow as external validation. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you learn to share the story," Ariana said. "To acknowledge that great companies are built by teams, not singular geniuses. To give credit where it's due and stop treating collaboration as a threat to your brand." "And if I can't?" Ariana's smile was sad. "Then Dominic and I will keep telling the truth until it sticks. We have the evidence, we have the platform, and we have nothing to lose." She moved toward the door, then paused. "But I hope you can, Sebastian. Because despite everything, I still believe the work we did together was valuable. I just refuse to let you be the only one who gets remembered for it." She left him standing in the warehouse where their dreams had been born, alone with the ghost of who they'd been before ambition and ego had poisoned everything. Sebastian's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. The restructuring agreements were finalized. Ariana would join the board effective immediately. Patent amendments were being filed within the hour. The press had already picked up the story of reconciliation and collaborative recognition. He looked around the empty warehouse one last time, then headed for the exit. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and harsh, and Sebastian squinted against it as he walked to his car. His empire had been built on Ariana's code. That truth was now inescapable, permanent, part of the public record. He could fight it, resent it, or learn to live with it. For the first time in 3 years, Sebastian chose truth over mythology. It didn't feel like victory, but maybe, eventually, it would feel like redemption. The drive back to Manhattan felt longer than 40 minutes. Sebastian sat in traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge, watching the skyline emerge through late afternoon haze, and tried to reconcile the man he'd been 3 hours ago with, whoever he was becoming now. His phone had been buzzing non-stop since he left the warehouse. Journalists requesting interviews, investors demanding explanations, former colleagues offering carefully worded support that felt more like distancing than solidarity. He ignored all of it. When he finally reached Logistream headquarters, the lobby was empty except for building security. The journalists had moved on to other stories, or perhaps they'd gotten enough footage of his shame to satisfy their editors. Sebastian took the elevator to the executive floor, expecting to find it deserted at nearly 6 in the evening. Instead, he found Ariana sitting in his office. She'd positioned herself in one of the guest chairs rather than behind his desk, a small gesture that somehow made her presence more unsettling rather than less. Her laptop was open, and she was reviewing something that made her frown with the particular concentration he remembered from their coding days. "You have a key card now?" Sebastian asked from the doorway. Ariana glanced up. "Board members get building access. Marcus issued it 2 hours ago." She gestured to the chair beside her. "We need to talk about the technology roadmap." Sebastian stepped into his own office feeling like an intruder. "The roadmap is locked for the next 18 months. We presented it to investors last quarter. That roadmap is built on assumptions about the algorithm's capabilities that are no longer accurate," Ariana said, turning her laptop so he could see. The screen showed Logistream's current routing efficiency metrics alongside projections for the next 2 years. "You've been pushing the system beyond its optimal parameters. Response times are degrading, error rates are climbing. You're treating my code like it has infinite scalability when it was designed with very specific constraints." Sebastian moved closer, scanning the data. She was right. The efficiency curves showed subtle degradation over the past 6 months, minor enough that his engineering team had dismissed it as normal variance. But Ariana saw patterns he'd missed. "The algorithm adapts," he said. "That's the whole point. It learns from new data and optimizes continuously." "Within defined boundaries," Ariana corrected. "You've been adding clients faster than the system can properly integrate their variables. Every new logistics network creates exponential complexity. The algorithm wasn't built to handle this volume without architectural modifications." She pulled up code that Sebastian recognized as Logistream's core routing engine, except now it was annotated with notes in Ariana's handwriting, highlighting sections that needed revision. "I've been analyzing your production environment since yesterday," she continued. "The system is stressed. You need to either slow client acquisition or rebuild the underlying architecture to handle increased load. Right now, you're running toward a catastrophic failure that will hit sometime in the next 4 to 6 months. Sebastian felt his defenses rising. "Our engineering team monitors system health constantly. If there was a critical issue, your engineering team doesn't understand the algorithm's foundation," Ariana interrupted. "They're optimizing symptoms without addressing root causes. Because you never explain to them how the core logic actually works." She paused. "Because you don't understand it yourself." The words hit like a physical blow. Sebastian had spent 3 years presenting himself as the technical genius behind Logistream's innovation. He'd given interviews about algorithmic design, spoken at conferences about predictive modeling, built an entire identity around being the architect of revolutionary code. And Ariana had just called his bluff in the most direct way possible. "I understand the business implications," he said tightly. "I understand market fit and scalability and customer acquisition. That's what builds companies." "And I understand the code that makes any of that possible," Ariana replied. "Which is why we need to work together instead of treating this as a territorial battle. Your company is heading toward a technical crisis. I can prevent it, but only if you're willing to acknowledge that you need help." Sebastian sank into the chair beside her, suddenly exhausted. "What do you want me to do?" "Give me access to the engineering team. Let me review the production architecture and propose modifications. Stop pretending you can maintain a system you didn't build and start leveraging the person who actually created it." Ariana's voice softened slightly. "I'm not trying to take over, Sebastian. I'm trying to save what we both built before your ego destroys it." He wanted to argue, to defend his technical competence, to prove that he was more than just the business front for someone else's genius. But sitting in his office with Ariana's code analysis spread between them, the truth was inescapable. He'd been playing a role for 3 years, and the performance was starting to crack under the weight of reality. "When can you start?" he asked quietly. "I already did." Ariana closed her laptop. "I've scheduled meetings with your lead engineers for tomorrow morning. Marcus is briefing the team tonight. Dominic suggested we present this as bringing in the original architect for optimization work, which has the benefit of being true while avoiding another PR crisis." Sebastian laughed bitterly. How considerate of him. He's protecting his investment, Ariana said, which happens to align with protecting the company. You should probably get comfortable with that dynamic, because it's going to define the next phase of Logistream's growth. She stood to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, you did build something valuable. The business development, the market positioning, the client relationships, that's real work that mattered. You just needed to share credit for the technical foundation instead of claiming it entirely. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to help you understand that this doesn't have to be a complete loss, Ariana replied. You can rebuild your reputation by being honest about collaboration, by showing that you're capable of growth and accountability, or you can dig in and fight reality until there's nothing left to fight over. She left before he could respond. Sebastian sat alone in his office as evening shadows stretched across the floor, thinking about all the interviews he'd given, all the conferences where he'd positioned himself as a singular genius, all the carefully crafted mythology that had just been exposed as fiction. His phone rang. Patricia Werner's name flashed on the screen. "We need to discuss transition planning," she said without preamble when he answered. "The board met this afternoon. There are concerns about your ability to effectively lead given the current circumstances." Sebastian's stomach dropped. "You're removing me as CEO." "We're discussing options," Patricia corrected. "Dominic suggested a co-leadership structure. You handle business operations and client relations. Ariana oversees technical development and product strategy. Publicly, you present as partners running the company together. She gets half my job. She gets recognition for the half that was always hers," Patricia shot back. "This isn't a punishment, Sebastian. It's a correction. And frankly, it's the gentlest possible outcome given what you did." "I built this company from nothing." "You built it from Ariana's code," Patricia said firmly. "The sooner you accept that reality, the sooner we can move forward productively. The board votes on the restructuring proposal in 3 days. I suggest you spend that time figuring out whether you can work with Ariana or whether we need to start discussing exit packages." She hung up before he could argue further. Sebastian set his phone on the desk and stared at the city lights beginning to glow across Manhattan. 3 years ago, he'd sat in this same office celebrating Logistream's first major funding round, convinced he was on the path to becoming a tech industry legend. Now he was facing the prospect of being demoted in his own company while the woman he'd erased claimed her rightful place. The irony wasn't lost on him. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Maya's lawyer with preliminary divorce papers attached. She was filing on grounds of irreconcilable differences and requesting a division of assets acquired during their brief marriage. Sebastian scanned the document with detached numbness. Maya wanted the apartment they'd bought together, the car he'd given her as an engagement gift, and a settlement that would ensure she could maintain her lifestyle while distancing herself from his scandal. He signed the acknowledgement without hesitation. What was one more loss at this point? The next morning, Sebastian arrived at headquarters before dawn to find Ariana already in the main conference room with 5 of Logistream's senior engineers. She'd connected her laptop to the main display and was walking them through the routing algorithm's core architecture, explaining design decisions and constraints with the ease of someone who'd lived inside the code for years. The adaptive learning module, she was saying, highlighting a section of the system diagram, was never meant to handle more than 50 simultaneous optimization threads. Right now, you're running 230. The algorithm compensates by degrading precision in lower priority calculations, which creates cascading errors that manifest as root inefficiencies 3 to 4 days after initial decisions. David Chen, Logistream's head of engineering, was taking notes with the intensity of someone realizing he'd been flying blind. "We've been treating those delayed errors as random variants. If they're actually systematic degradation." "They are," Ariana confirmed, "and they'll get worse as you add more clients. Unless we rebuild the threading architecture to handle parallel optimization at scale." "How long would that take?" David asked. 6 months if we do it right. 3 if we accept higher risk and shorter testing cycles." Ariana glanced at Sebastian, who'd been watching from the doorway. "But that requires pulling engineers off new feature development to focus on foundation work. It's a trade-off between growth velocity and system stability." All eyes turned to Sebastian. This was his call, his authority as CEO. Except now everyone in the room knew that Ariana understood the technology in ways he never had. System stability wins, he said. We can't scale if the foundation cracks. Prioritize the architecture rebuild. Relief flashed across David's face. I'll reassign the team today. The meeting continued for another hour, Ariana systematically identifying technical debt and optimization opportunities that Sebastian's team had missed. She was patient with their questions, generous with her expertise, and utterly professional in her collaboration. Watching her work, Sebastian felt an unexpected emotion rise in his chest. Pride. Not in himself, but in what Ariana had created, in the brilliance he'd claimed but never truly appreciated, in the innovation that had made everything else possible. When the engineers finally dispersed to begin implementation work, Ariana started packing up her materials. Sebastian approached the conference table, uncertain what to say but knowing silence would be worse. They respect you, he said. The team. They were taking notes like you were revealing secrets of the universe. I'm revealing how their system actually works, Ariana replied, which apparently is information they should have had 3 years ago. I should have brought you in sooner. You should have never pushed me out. She looked at him directly. But we're past that now. The question is whether we can build something functional going forward or whether we're going to spend the next 6 months fighting over territory. Sebastian pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. The board wants co-leadership. You and me running the company together. Business operation versus technical strategy. I heard, Ariana said. Dominic mentioned it last night. He thinks it's the cleanest solution. What do you think? She considered the question carefully. I think we were good partners once, before ego and credit and all the bullshit got in the way. I think we both care about Logistream succeeding, even if we disagree about how to get there. She paused. And I think if we can find a way to actually collaborate instead of compete, we might build something better than what either of us could do alone. That's a very diplomatic answer. It's an honest answer, Ariana corrected. I don't trust you yet, Sebastian. You spent 3 years erasing me. That doesn't disappear because you said sorry in a warehouse. But I'm willing to see if we can rebuild something professional, maybe even something respectful. What would that look like? Clear boundaries, defined responsibilities. You handle what you're actually good at. Investor relations, business development, strategic partnerships. I handle technical architecture, product development, engineering leadership. We make major decisions together. We present publicly as partners, and we stop pretending either of us can run this company alone. It was everything Sebastian had avoided for 3 years. Shared credit, collaborative leadership, public acknowledgement that Logistream's success required both of them. His ego screamed against it even as his rational mind recognized it as the only viable path forward. What if we disagree, he asked, on strategy or direction or priorities? Then we argue like adults until we find compromise, Ariana said, or we bring it to the board and let them decide. But we don't undermine each other, we don't go behind each other's backs, and we absolutely don't claim credit for work we didn't do. Sebastian nodded slowly. I can work with that. Can you really? Ariana's voice carried skepticism. Because this means sharing the spotlight, doing joint interviews, presenting as a team at conferences. Every time someone calls you a visionary, you'll need to redirect credit to collaboration. Can you actually do that? He thought about the past 3 years, about all the magazine covers and keynote speeches and investor pitches where he'd positioned himself as the singular genius behind Logistream's innovation, about how good it had felt to be celebrated, to be recognized, to be seen as special, about how much of his identity had become wrapped up in that mythology. And then he thought about Ariana in that warehouse, writing code at 3 a.m. while he slept on a cot nearby. About the moment she'd shown him the first working version of her algorithm, her face glowing with exhausted triumph. About how he'd felt watching her create something revolutionary and knowing he'd married someone extraordinary. I don't know if I can, he admitted, but I want to try. Something shifted in Ariana's expression. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of possibility. That's more honest than I expected. I'm trying to be better at honesty. Good, because Dominic's setting up a joint interview with TechCrunch for next week. They want the full story, how we built the company together, why we split, how we're reuniting professionally. It's going to be uncomfortable. Define uncomfortable. They're going to ask about the patents, about why your name was listed alone, about whether you deliberately erased my contributions or just failed to properly attribute them. Ariana's voice was steady. And we're going to tell the truth. That we were married, that the lines got blurred, that you made choices you shouldn't have, and that we're correcting them now. No spin, no deflection, just honesty. Sebastian felt his throat tighten. The truth makes me look terrible. The truth makes you look human, Ariana corrected, flawed and ambitious and willing to take shortcuts, but also capable of growth, capable of acknowledging mistakes. That's actually a better story than the mythology you were selling. You really believe that? I believe people respect authenticity more than perfection, Ariana said. Your image as a flawless visionary was always going to crack eventually. Better to control the narrative by being honest than to have it exposed by someone else. She had a point. The mythology had already cracked. The question now was whether Sebastian could build something real in its place. The board meeting 3 days later was surprisingly anticlimactic. Patricia presented the co-leadership proposal with clinical efficiency. Ariana would become Chief Technology Officer with full authority over product development and engineering. Sebastian would remain CEO with focus on business operations and external partnerships. Major strategic decisions would require joint approval. Public communications would emphasize collaborative leadership. The vote was unanimous. Sebastian sat through the restructuring discussions feeling oddly detached, like he was watching his empire being reorganized from a great distance. When the meeting adjourned, Dominic approached him with an expression that might have been sympathy. "This must be difficult for you," the billionaire said. "You're enjoying it," Sebastian replied. "I'm appreciating justice," Dominic corrected, "but I take no pleasure in your discomfort. I've known brilliant people who made similar mistakes, claiming credit that wasn't entirely theirs, believing their own mythology, forgetting the people who made their success possible." He paused. "Some of them learned and grew, others doubled down and destroyed themselves. Which path you take is entirely up to you." "Why do you care which path I take?" "Because Ariana cares," Dominic said simply. "And because Vail Capital's investment is predicated on this company succeeding. You're still a valuable asset, Sebastian. You're good at what you actually do, reading markets, building relationships, selling vision. You're just not the technical genius you pretended to be. Accept that, and you can still build something significant." He left Sebastian standing in the conference room, contemplating a future where his value came from what he could actually do rather than what he could claim. The TechCrunch interview happened the following Tuesday in a neutral studio space with cameras, lights, and a journalist named Rachel Kim, who'd built her reputation on asking uncomfortable questions. Sebastian and Ariana sat side by side on a minimalist couch, while Rachel positioned herself across from them with a recorder and notes. "Let's start with the obvious question," Rachel said after the cameras started rolling. "Sebastian, you've spent 3 years presenting yourself as the primary innovator behind Logistream's technology. Now we know that's not accurate. Why did you claim credit for work Ariana did?" Sebastian had rehearsed his answer with 3 different PR consultants, but sitting under the lights with Ariana beside him and Rachel's eyes boring into him, all the careful phrasing felt hollow. "Because it was easier," he said finally. "Investors wanted a clear narrative. One founder, one vision, one face to bet on. Ariana and I were married. We were building the company together. I convinced myself that the specifics of who created what didn't matter because we were a team." He paused. "I was wrong. The specifics mattered, credit mattered, and I took something that wasn't mine to take. Did you deliberately erase Ariana from patent filings and press coverage?" "Yes." The word tasted like ash. "Not maliciously. I didn't wake up thinking about how to hurt her. But I made choices that prioritized my image over accuracy. I let journalists quote only me. I filed patents with only my name. I built a mythology where I was the hero, and Ariana became invisible." Rachel turned to Ariana. "How did that feel? Watching your husband claim your work?" "Like being erased," Ariana said quietly. "Like everything I created mattered less than Sebastian's story. Like I was disposable." Her voice strengthened. "But I'm not disposable. My code built this company, and I refuse to let Sebastian's narrative be the only version of history. Is that why you included the equity clause in your divorce settlement? Yes. I knew the algorithm was valuable. I knew Logistream would eventually succeed, and I knew that when it did, I wanted a path back in. Not for revenge, but for recognition. Rachel looked between them. Can you actually work together after everything that's happened? The betrayal, the public exposure, the restructuring? Sebastian and Ariana exchanged glances. They'd discussed this question extensively, preparing for exactly this moment, but the rehearsed answer felt inadequate sitting beside the woman he'd wronged. I don't know, Sebastian said honestly. We were good partners once, before I let ambition corrupt that partnership. Whether we can rebuild something functional, that's going to take time and trust and a lot of hard work. But we're committed to trying, Ariana added, because Logistream is bigger than our personal history, because the technology deserves to reach its full potential, and because maybe, if we can find a way to collaborate with integrity this time, we can build something better than what we had before. The interview continued for another 40 minutes, covering everything from the technical details of Ariana's algorithm to Sebastian's journey toward accountability to their vision for Logistream's future. Rachel asked hard questions. Sebastian gave uncomfortable answers. Ariana provided context and correction when his responses veered toward deflection. When it finally ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Sebastian felt hollowed out and strangely lighter, like confession had excised something toxic he'd been carrying for years. That was brutal, he said to Ariana as they left the studio. That was honest, she corrected, which is what we needed. The interview published 2 days later and went immediately viral. Not because it exposed new scandals, the truth was already public, but because it showed something rare in the tech industry. Two people who'd betrayed and hurt each other trying to find a way forward through honesty rather than litigation. Founders acknowledging mistakes instead of deflecting blame. A man accepting accountability for erasure, and a woman demanding recognition without seeking destruction. The response was mixed. Some commentators praised Sebastian's willingness to admit fault. Others argued that acknowledgement didn't erase the harm he'd caused. Tech Twitter debated whether redemption was possible or whether Sebastian should be permanently exiled from leadership. Ariana was alternately celebrated as a brilliant engineer reclaiming her legacy and criticized for working with the man who'd stolen from her. But underneath all the debate and hot takes and think pieces, something shifted. The narrative evolved from simple villain-victim dynamics into something more complex. A story about collaboration and credit, about ambition and integrity, about two people trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage of what they'd destroyed. Sebastian sat in his office 3 weeks after the interview published, reviewing quarterly financials with Marcus when Ariana knocked on his open door. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. Marcus excused himself, leaving them alone. Ariana entered and closed the door behind her, her expression serious. "David's team finished the architecture rebuild," she said. "We're ready to implement the new threading system, but it requires taking the platform offline for 6 hours during the migration." Sebastian pulled up the client calendar. 6 hours offline means missing delivery windows for 300 customers. "I know, but the alternative is waiting until the current system fails catastrophically, which could mean days of downtime and permanent data loss." He studied her face, looking for certainty. "You're sure this is necessary?" "I'm sure the system is stressed beyond safe parameters," Ariana replied. "I'm sure that continuing on the current architecture risks everything we've built. Whether you trust my technical judgment enough to authorize the migration, that's your call." It was a test, Sebastian realized. Not of his business acumen, but of whether he could actually defer to Ariana's expertise on the technology she'd created. Whether his ego would let him trust her authority in her domain. "When's the optimal window?" he asked. "Sunday night, lowest traffic volume. We start the migration at midnight, complete by 6 in the morning. Clients get notification 72 hours in advance." Sebastian made the decision before his doubts could surface. "Do it. I'll handle client communications. You focus on execution." Something like respect flickered in Ariana's eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me. For not second-guessing my technical decisions with business concerns." "It's your code," Sebastian said. "I'm finally learning to let you be the expert on what you created." Ariana nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "We're getting better at this. The collaboration thing. It's still awkward and sometimes painful, but we're figuring it out. Does that surprise you? Honestly, yes. I thought your ego would make it impossible. She smiled slightly. I'm glad to be wrong. After she left, Sebastian sat alone with his quarterly reports and thought about how much had changed in a month. He'd lost his mythology, his marriage, and half his authority. But he'd gained something unexpected in return, the possibility of building something real rather than performing something hollow. It wasn't the empire he'd imagined, but perhaps it was something better. The architecture migration happened on a Sunday night in late September, 3 months after Ariana had walked back into Sebastian's life and dismantled everything he'd built on stolen ground. Sebastian stood in Logistream's operations center, watching dozens of monitors display real-time system status as David Chen's engineering team executed the most critical technical operation in the company's history. Ariana sat at the central workstation, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced precision, calling out commands to engineers positioned at various terminals throughout the room. She'd been awake for nearly 20 hours preparing for this moment, running simulations and stress tests and contingency protocols until Sebastian had finally insisted she eat something other than cold pizza and energy drinks. Migration sequence initiating, David announced at exactly midnight. All client traffic redirected to backup systems, primary database entering read-only mode. The largest monitor at the front of the room showed a complex flowchart of the migration process, hundreds of interdependent steps that needed to execute flawlessly over the next 6 hours. One critical error could corrupt the entire system, erasing 3 years of operational data and destroying Logistream's ability to function. Sebastian's role in this operation was essentially to stay out of the way and trust that Ariana knew what she was doing. It was harder than it sounded. First data partition transferred, one of the engineers called out 30 minutes into the migration. Integrity check passing. Thread allocation rebuilding. Ariana nodded without looking up from her screen. Continue sequence. Monitor memory utilization closely. If we exceed 85%, pause and offload to secondary buffers. Sebastian moved to stand beside Marcus, who'd also come in to witness the migration despite it being well past midnight. The CFO looked as anxious as Sebastian felt. If this fails, Marcus said quietly, we're looking at weeks of recovery time, maybe months. Most of our clients will jump to competitors rather than wait. It won't fail, Sebastian said with more confidence than he felt. Ariana's been planning this for 3 months. She knows every variable, every risk, every potential failure point. You sound like you actually trust her. Sebastian considered the observation. 3 months ago, trusting Ariana with anything would have been unthinkable. She'd been the enemy, the threat, the woman who'd stolen half his company and exposed his lies to the world. Now she was his partner, his co-leader, and the only person who could save Logistream from the technical debt his neglect had created. I trust her expertise, Sebastian replied carefully. Whether she trusts me is still an open question. The migration continued through the early morning hours. Data transferred partition by partition, the new threading architecture building itself from Ariana's redesigned code. Small issues emerged, a memory allocation error at 3 a.m, a threading conflict at 4:30, but Ariana and her team solved each problem with the systematic efficiency of people who'd anticipated every possible complication. By 5 a.m, Sebastian's exhaustion was giving way to something like awe. Watching Ariana work, seeing her command the engineering team with quiet authority and deep technical knowledge, he understood in a visceral way what he'd tried to claim as his own 3 years ago. This wasn't just code. It was architecture, artistry, and innovation functioning at the highest level. Final partition transferring now, David announced as dawn light began filtering through the operations center windows. New threading system online, running validation protocols. The room held its collective breath while automated tests verified that the migrated data matched the original, that the new architecture performed as designed, that nothing critical had been lost or corrupted in the transition. Ariana's screen filled with green checkmarks as each validation passed. Her shoulders, which had been tensed for hours, finally relaxed slightly. Migration successful, she said, her voice rough with fatigue. Bringing primary systems back online, client traffic resuming in 3, 2, 1. The monitors showed routing requests flooding back into the system, thousands of delivery optimizations being calculated simultaneously by the new architecture. Response times that had been degrading for months suddenly improved by 40%. Error rates dropped to near zero. The algorithm that Ariana had created 3 years ago was finally running at the capacity she'd always envisioned. The engineering team erupted in exhausted cheers. David was hugging anyone within reach. Marcus looked like he might cry with relief. And Ariana sat at her workstation monitoring the metrics with the focused calm of someone who'd known exactly what would happen because she'd built it to work this way. Sebastian approached her, aware that everyone in the room was watching. "You saved the company tonight." Ariana finally looked up from her screen. "I saved the system I created. The company is still your responsibility." "Our responsibility," Sebastian corrected. "That's the agreement, right? Collaborative leadership?" Something softened in her expression. "Yeah, I guess it is." The operations center gradually emptied as engineers headed home to sleep off their all-night vigil. Marcus departed with promises to draft a client communication celebrating the successful upgrade. David lingered long enough to thank Ariana profusely before stumbling toward the elevator with bloodshot eyes. Eventually, only Sebastian and Ariana remained in the vast room full of humming servers and glowing monitors. "You should go home," Sebastian said. "You've been awake for almost 24 hours. "So have you," Ariana pointed out. "I was just watching. You were actually working." She smiled tiredly. "Watching is harder than you think. At least when I'm coding, I'm too focused to be anxious." Sebastian pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, his body grateful for the rest. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan was waking up. Early morning traffic, joggers in the park across the street, delivery trucks beginning their routes that would be optimized by Ariana's algorithm. "Can I ask you something?" Sebastian said. "Depends what it is." "Why did you come back? You could have triggered the equity clause remotely, taken your 18%, and hired lawyers to fight for credit from a distance. Why show up at my birthday party? Why work directly with me when you had every reason to hate me?" Ariana was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the cityscape. "Because hating you from a distance was easier than hating you in person. Because I needed to look you in the eye and see if there was anything left of the man I married." She paused. "And because as angry as I was about what you did, I still cared about what we built together. Walking away completely would have meant abandoning my code to someone who didn't understand it. I couldn't do that. So this was always about the algorithm, not revenge." "It was about both," Ariana admitted. "I wanted you to face consequences for erasing me. I wanted the world to know the truth, but I also wanted to protect my work, to make sure it reached its full potential, rather than being run into the ground by someone treating it like a black box they could exploit without understanding." Sebastian absorbed this, recognizing the complexity of motivations he'd tried to reduce to simple vindictiveness. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you came back. Not just because the company needed you, but because I needed to face what I'd done. To stop living in a mythology that was destroying me as much as it destroyed us." "Are you sleeping better now?" Ariana asked, "without the constant performance?" The question surprised him. "How did you know I wasn't sleeping?" "Because I know you, Sebastian. Or I used to. You were never good at living with cognitive dissonance. Claiming work you didn't do, maintaining lies, performing expertise you didn't have. That must have been exhausting." She was right. The past 3 years had been a constant state of low-level anxiety, always worried that someone would ask a technical question he couldn't answer, always preparing for the moment when his lack of deep understanding would be exposed. Living that way had been its own prison. "I sleep better now," he said quietly. "Turns out honesty is less stressful than deception." "Imagine that," Ariana said with dry humor. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up through the windows. Sebastian tried to remember the last time they'd shared a moment like this, peaceful, collaborative, without the weight of betrayal and resentment between them. It had been before the first investor pitch, before the patents were filed, before he'd made the choice that would poison everything they'd built together. "I miss this," Sebastian said before he could stop himself. Ariana turned to look at him. "Miss what?" "Being partners. Working together towards something bigger than our individual egos. Before everything got complicated. Before you made it complicated," Ariana corrected gently. Let's be clear about cause and effect. Before I made it complicated, Sebastian agreed. Do you think we can ever get back to that? Not romantically, he added quickly. I know that ship has sailed, but professionally, as collaborators who actually respect each other. Ariana considered the question seriously. I think we're building toward it. These past 3 months, watching you actually defer to my technical judgment, seeing you acknowledge your limitations publicly, that matters. But trust takes time, Sebastian. You spent 3 years erasing me. I'm not going to forget that because you've been cooperative for a few months. What would it take for you to trust me again? Consistency, Ariana said. Keep doing what you're doing, sharing credit, being honest about collaboration, respecting boundaries. Don't backslide the first time your ego gets bruised or someone questions your authority. Prove that the change is real and lasting, not just a temporary performance to manage the crisis. It was a fair answer, though Sebastian had hoped for something more concrete, but maybe that was the point. Trust couldn't be rebuilt through grand gestures or carefully crafted apologies. It required the slow, unglamorous work of being reliable, honest, and respectful day after day until the pattern became undeniable. I can do that, Sebastian said. We'll see, Ariana replied, but there was warmth in her voice rather than skepticism. The weeks that followed the successful migration brought unexpected stability to Logistream. Client satisfaction scores improved dramatically as the new architecture delivered faster, more accurate routing. Press coverage shifted from scandal to redemption narrative, two founders finding a way to work together despite painful history. Investor confidence stabilized as Dominic Vale continued his vocal support, and the company's metrics trended consistently upward. Sebastian fell into a rhythm with Ariana that felt almost natural. She handled technical strategy and product development while he focused on business operations and client relationships. They met daily to align on priorities, weekly with the full executive team, and monthly with the board to present unified leadership. Their collaboration wasn't seamless. They still disagreed on timelines and resource allocation and strategic direction, but they'd learned to argue productively rather than destructively. In early November, Dominic invited both of them to dinner at an exclusive restaurant in Tribeca. Sebastian assumed it was a routine check-in, a chance for their primary investor to assess how the co-leadership arrangement was functioning. He arrived to find Dominic and Ariana already seated, sharing wine and conversation with the ease of people who'd spent considerable time together. Sebastian, Dominic greeted him warmly. Thank you for joining us. I have a proposition I wanted to discuss with both of you. Sebastian settled into his chair, already wary. Dominic's propositions had a way of fundamentally altering reality. Vale Capital is planning a significant expansion into logistics technology, Dominic continued once their server had taken orders. We're looking to build a portfolio of companies that can integrate seamlessly: last-mile delivery, warehouse automation, predictive maintenance, supply chain finance. Logistream would be the cornerstone of this ecosystem. That's ambitious, Sebastian said carefully. What kind of integration are we talking about? Strategic partnerships primarily, but also potential acquisitions of smaller companies that complement Logistream's capabilities. Dominic looked between them. It would require significant capital investment and aggressive growth over the next 2 years. The goal would be to position Logistream for IPO at a valuation north of $2 billion. Sebastian felt his pulse quicken. $2 billion? It was the number he dreamed about 3 years ago when he'd first started building his mythology. Except now the path to get there required actual collaboration rather than stolen credit. What's the timeline? Ariana asked. 18 to 24 months. We'd need to double your engineering team, expand to 3 new markets, and integrate at least 2 acquired companies into your platform. Dominic paused. It's an aggressive timeline, but I believe you're capable of executing it if you work together effectively. Sebastian exchanged glances with Ariana. This was exactly the kind of opportunity that could either cement their partnership or destroy it under the pressure of impossible expectations. We'd need to see detailed projections, Sebastian said. Growth targets, capital requirements, organizational structure. Of course. My team has prepared comprehensive materials. Dominic smiled. But before we get into specifics, I need to know if you're both committed to this path. If the co-leadership arrangement is solid enough to handle the stress of hypergrowth. It was the question Sebastian had been avoiding asking himself. Were they solid? Could they sustain collaboration under the pressure of doubling the company size, managing acquisitions, preparing for public markets? Or would old tensions resurface the moment stakes got higher? I'm committed, Ariana said, but I need autonomy on technical decisions. If we're acquiring companies and integrating their technology, I need authority to determine architecture and engineering strategy without Sebastian second-guessing every choice. Agreed, Sebastian said. And I need the same autonomy on business operations, client negotiations, partnership terms, market expansion. Those have to be my domain without constant technical objections about implementation details. Dominic looked pleased. So you've actually learned to divide responsibilities based on expertise. How refreshing. We've learned a lot of things, Ariana said dryly, mostly through painful trial and error. The dinner continued with Dominic outlining his vision for a logistics technology ecosystem, his plans for sector consolidation, his belief that LogiStream could become the dominant platform if they executed flawlessly. Sebastian found himself energized by the possibility, by the scope of what they could build if the partnership held. Later, after Dominic had departed and Sebastian and Ariana stood outside the restaurant waiting for separate cars, she turned to him with unexpected vulnerability in her expression. Can we really do this? She asked. Build something this ambitious together without destroying each other again? Sebastian thought about the past 3 months, about every moment of successful collaboration and every argument that had ended in compromise rather than resentment, about watching Ariana command the engineering migration and feeling pride instead of jealousy, about the slow, difficult work of rebuilding trust one honest conversation at a time. I think we can, he said, not because we've solved everything or because there won't be more conflicts, but because we're both committed to something bigger than our individual egos, and because this time we're building on truth instead of mythology. Ariana nodded slowly. Then let's do it. Let's build something extraordinary, together, as actual partners. She extended her hand. Sebastian took it, feeling the weight of the commitment they were making. Not to each other personally, that bridge had burned beyond repair, but to the work, to the vision, to the possibility that two imperfect people could create something valuable if they led with honesty instead of deception. The next 6 months passed in a blur of growth and chaos. LogiStream acquired 2 smaller companies, a warehouse automation startup and a delivery optimization platform, and began the complex process of integrating their technology and teams. Ariana's engineering organization doubled in size, then tripled. Sebastian negotiated partnerships with 3 major retailers and expanded operations to Chicago, Seattle, and Dallas. The pressure was relentless. 18-hour days became routine, weekend work sessions to align on strategy, late-night calls to resolve integration issues. Every week brought new crises that required both of them to function at their highest capacity while somehow maintaining their fragile partnership. They fought, frequently and sometimes loudly. Ariana thought Sebastian was moving too fast on market expansion without ensuring technical stability. Sebastian thought Ariana was too cautious about integration timelines, letting perfect be the enemy of good. They disagreed about hiring priorities, capital allocation, and whether to pursue additional acquisitions or consolidate what they had. But they also learned to recognize when conflicts were about substance versus ego, when to compromise versus hold firm, when to escalate to the board versus resolve issues privately. They developed a working language, a mutual understanding of each other's priorities and pressure points and non-negotiables. In April, 7 months into Dominic's aggressive growth plan, they hit a crisis that tested everything they'd built. One of the acquired companies had misrepresented their technology capabilities. The integration was failing badly, threatening to destabilize LogiStream's entire platform. Ariana wanted to shut down the problematic systems immediately and rebuild from scratch, a process that would take 3 months and delay their IPO timeline. Sebastian wanted to patch and optimize the existing code, keeping the integration on schedule even if it meant accepting some technical debt. The argument erupted in Sebastian's office late on a Friday evening, both of them exhausted and frustrated and unable to find common ground. We can't build sustainable growth on broken technology, Ariana insisted. You're prioritizing timeline over quality, and that's exactly the kind of thinking that got us into trouble 3 years ago. And you're letting perfectionism paralyze progress, Sebastian shot back. Sometimes good enough is actually good enough. Sometimes you have to ship and iterate rather than rebuilding everything from first principles. This isn't perfectionism. This is basic structural integrity. If we push forward on compromised architecture, we're creating cascading failures that will be exponentially harder to fix later. If we delay 3 months, we miss our IPO window, and Dominic pulls support. Then none of this matters because the company collapses under its own weight. They stared at each other across Sebastian's desk, the same fundamental tension that had destroyed their marriage now threatening their professional partnership. Trust your expertise versus trust mine. Move fast versus build right. Business imperatives versus technical realities. We're at an impasse, Ariana said finally. We need a tiebreaker. Sebastian knew she was right. They'd argued in circles for 2 hours without movement. Board vote? Board vote, Ariana agreed. They scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. Sebastian spent the weekend preparing his case, financial projections showing the cost of delay, competitive analysis demonstrating the urgency of maintaining momentum, partnership commitments that depended on hitting timeline targets. He assumed Ariana was doing the same, marshaling technical evidence and risk assessments to support her position. Monday morning arrived with the kind of spring rain that turned Manhattan streets into rivers. Sebastian reached the conference room first, his presentation loaded and ready. The board filed in. Patricia, Thomas, 3 other members, and Dominic arriving last with rain beating on his expensive overcoat. Ariana entered carrying only a laptop and a coffee that suggested she'd been awake most of the night. Sebastian presented first, laying out the business case for pushing forward with optimized integration despite technical imperfections. His arguments were solid, his data compelling. Several board members nodded along, clearly persuaded by the logic. Then it was Ariana's turn. She opened her laptop and pulled up something that made Sebastian's stomach drop. Not a presentation about technical architecture or risk assessments. Instead, she showed system logs from the problematic integration, the actual data about how the compromised code was performing in production. I spent the weekend running stress tests on the patched systems Sebastian wants to deploy, Ariana said quietly. Not theoretical models, actual simulations using real client data and traffic patterns. She advanced to the next slide, showing failure rates and error cascades. If we push this code into production, we have a 73% probability of catastrophic system failure within 6 weeks. Not degraded performance. Complete failure that would take the entire platform offline for days, possibly weeks. The room went silent. These aren't projections based on cautious assumptions, Ariana continued. This is empirical data showing that the integration Sebastian wants to pursue will destroy the company. Not might destroy. Will destroy. She turned to look at Sebastian directly. I know you want to hit the timeline. I know Dominic's investment is contingent on maintaining momentum. But I'm telling you, as the person who built this technology and understands it better than anyone else in this room, that what you're proposing is corporate suicide dressed up as aggressive growth. Sebastian felt something shift inside him. 3 years ago, he would have argued, would have questioned her methodology, would have suggested she was being overly cautious or letting personal conflict cloud her technical judgment. But sitting in that boardroom, looking at data that clearly showed his proposal would destroy everything they'd built, he finally understood what collaboration actually required. Trust. Not blind trust. Not trust based on hope or emotion or wishful thinking, but trust rooted in recognizing expertise and deferring to knowledge that exceeded his own. You're right, Sebastian said, and the words came easier than he expected. I was wrong. We shut down the problematic integration, rebuild properly, and push the IPO timeline. Ariana blinked, clearly surprised. Just like that? Just like that, Sebastian confirmed. He looked at Dominic. I know this affects your investment thesis, but Ariana's data is conclusive. We can't build a $2 billion company on technology that has a 73% failure rate. Better to delay and build right than rush forward and collapse. Dominic studied both of them with an expression Sebastian couldn't quite read. Then the billionaire smiled. Unanimous board approval for Ariana's approach, he said. And Sebastian, that may have been the smartest business decision you've made since I've known you. The meeting adjourned with plans to communicate the timeline adjustment to investors and clients. Board members filed out discussing risk mitigation and contingency planning. Eventually, only Sebastian and Ariana remained in the conference room. "Thank you," Ariana said quietly, "for trusting my judgment, for not fighting me in front of the board just to protect your position. Thank you for doing the work to prove your case with data, instead of just asking me to take it on faith," Sebastian replied. "That's partnership. Both of us bringing our expertise and respecting each other's domains." Ariana smiled, and for the first time in 3 months, it reached her eyes. "We might actually be getting good at this." "Don't jinx it," Sebastian said, but he was smiling too. The rebuild took 4 months instead of 3. Logistream's IPO was delayed until October. Some investors grumbled about the timeline slip, but Dominic's continued support kept confidence stable. And when the new integration finally went live in August, it performed flawlessly, faster, more stable, and more scalable than anything Sebastian's patched approach could have achieved. Watching the metrics on launch day, seeing Ariana's rebuilt architecture handle traffic that would have crashed his proposed solution, Sebastian felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine pride in someone else's achievement. Not possessive pride, not reflected glory, but authentic appreciation for brilliance that existed independent of his ego. Ariana had built something extraordinary. She'd saved the company from his short-sighted business priorities, and he was grateful for it. "Hey," he said, approaching her workstation as the engineering team celebrated around them. "I owe you an apology." Ariana looked up from her monitoring screen. "For what specifically? We've covered a lot of ground." "For thinking I knew better, for letting business metrics override technical reality, for almost destroying what you built because I was too focused on timelines to listen to expertise." He paused. "You saved Logistream. Again. And I'm sorry I needed data to prove what you already knew." "You're learning," Ariana said. "Slowly, painfully, but you're learning." She stood and extended her hand. "Partners?" Sebastian took it, feeling the weight of everything that word now meant. Partners. As autumn arrived and Logistream prepared for its October IPO, Sebastian found himself in territory he'd never imagined 3 years ago. Co-leading a company with the woman he'd once tried to erase, sharing credit publicly and genuinely, building something valuable on a foundation of honesty rather than mythology. It wasn't the empire he'd envisioned, but it was real, sustainable, and built to last. And that, Sebastian was learning, mattered more than glory. The morning of Logistream's IPO arrived with crystalline October sunshine that made Manhattan's financial district gleam like a promise. Sebastian stood in front of his bedroom mirror at 5 in the morning, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time and trying to quiet the nervousness churning in his stomach. Today, the company he'd co-founded would begin trading on the New York Stock Exchange with an opening valuation of $2.3 billion. 3 years ago, he would have imagined this moment as his personal coronation. Sebastian Cole, tech visionary, ringing the opening bell alone while the world celebrated his genius. Instead, he'd be standing beside Ariana Blake, sharing the moment and the credit equally, their names listed side by side on every press release and SEC filing. It was better this way. He knew that now. But knowing didn't stop the whisper of his old ego asking what this could have been if he'd never been caught, if the mythology had held. His phone buzzed with the text from Ariana. "Ready for this?" Sebastian typed back. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You?" "Terrified, but the good kind of terrified." He smiled at that, pocketed his phone, and headed out into the pre-dawn city. The streets were mostly empty except for delivery trucks, many of them optimized by Ariana's algorithm, and early morning joggers. Sebastian walked the 20 blocks to the stock exchange building, needing the movement to burn off nervous energy. Marcus was already there when Sebastian arrived, along with Patricia and the rest of the board. Dominic stood near the windows overlooking Broad Street, looking remarkably calm for someone whose investment was about to be tested by public markets. "Big day," the billionaire said when Sebastian approached. "Biggest of my life," Sebastian agreed. "Thank you for believing in the company even after everything that happened." "I didn't invest in mythology," Dominic replied. "I invested in truth, in brilliant technology and the person who actually created it, You were just part of the package, the business operator who happened to be learning integrity the hard way. It was a characteristically blunt assessment, but Sebastian had stopped being offended by Dominic's directness months ago. The man had earned the right to speak plainly. Ariana arrived 30 minutes later, looking composed despite the magnitude of the day. She wore a navy suit that was professional without being severe, and her hair was pulled back in the style Sebastian remembered from their early days, practical, efficient, ready to work. The engineering team is monitoring systems remotely, she told Sebastian after greeting the board members. If anything goes wrong with the platform during trading hours, we'll know immediately. Nothing's going to go wrong, Sebastian said with more confidence than he felt. Your architecture is solid. We've stress-tested it beyond any reasonable traffic projections. Reasonable being the operative word, Ariana said dryly. Markets aren't always reasonable. At 8:30, they were escorted to the trading floor for final preparations before the opening bell. Camera crews had assembled, financial journalists were positioning themselves for optimal shots, and stock exchange officials were coordinating the ceremony with practiced efficiency. Sebastian and Ariana stood together on the podium overlooking the trading floor, and for a moment, the enormity of what they'd accomplished hit him with unexpected force. From a failing warehouse startup to a publicly traded company worth billions. From stolen credit and buried partnerships to collaborative leadership recognized by the entire industry. From personal betrayal to professional redemption. Can I say something? Sebastian asked quietly, aware that cameras might pick up their conversation but needing to speak anyway. Now? Ariana looked mildly panicked. We're about to ring the bell. I know, but I need you to hear this before we do. He turned to face her fully. I spent 3 years trying to be the sole architect of Logistream's success, building mythology, claiming credit, erasing your contributions. And I was miserable the entire time. Not just because of guilt, though that was there too, but because I was performing a role I wasn't qualified for, pretending to be someone I'm not. Sebastian, let me finish, he interrupted gently. These past 10 months, working with you as actual partners, sharing credit honestly, building something real instead of performing something hollow, this has been better than anything I imagined when I was living the lie. And I want you to know that before we step into this next chapter, whatever happens with the IPO, whatever the markets do, whatever comes next for Logistream, I'm grateful we're doing it together, as partners, as collaborators who respect each other. Ariana's eyes were bright, though whether from emotion or the bright lights, Sebastian couldn't tell. That might be the most honest thing you've ever said to me. I'm trying to make honesty a habit. It looks good on you, Ariana said, and she smiled with genuine warmth. And for what it's worth, I'm glad we found our way back to partnership too. It's not what either of us expected 3 years ago, but it's real. That matters. A stock exchange official approached, signaling that they had 2 minutes until the opening bell. Sebastian and Ariana moved into position, joined by Dominic and the board members who'd supported Logistream's growth. The final seconds counted down. Sebastian's hand hovered over the button that would ring the bell, but he hesitated and looked at Ariana. Together? He asked. She placed her hand beside his. Together. They pressed the button simultaneously, and the opening bell rang out across the trading floor. Traders erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. On the massive screens above them, Logistream's ticker symbol appeared with an opening price of $53 per share, 20% above the projected range. The markets had spoken. Logistream was valuable, not because of mythology or manufactured genius, but because of real innovation built by talented people working collaboratively. Sebastian found himself laughing with relief and something close to joy. Beside him, Ariana was grinning despite obvious efforts to maintain professional composure. Dominic clapped them both on the shoulders with paternal pride. Congratulations, the billionaire said. You built something extraordinary, both of you. The morning dissolved into a blur of interviews and photographs and congratulatory calls from investors and clients. Sebastian and Ariana stood side by side for every interview, carefully sharing credit and emphasizing collaborative innovation. Financial journalists asked about their unusual partnership, about rebuilding trust after public betrayal, about whether co-leadership could survive the pressures of being a public company. We've proven we can work through conflicts, Ariana told a CNBC reporter. We've learned to respect each other's expertise and defer to knowledge rather than ego. That foundation will serve us well regardless of what challenges come next. The strongest companies are built on truth, Sebastian added. For a while, Logistream was built on mythology. Now it's built on honest collaboration and real innovation. That's a much more sustainable foundation for long-term growth. By midday, Logistream's stock had climbed to $62 per share. The company's market capitalization exceeded $2.8 billion. Sebastian's personal stake was worth approximately $400 million. Ariana's 18% equity position was valued at over $500 million. They were both, by any reasonable definition, extraordinarily wealthy. Yet, sitting in a conference room during a brief break between media obligations, watching the stock price tick upward on a monitor, Sebastian felt oddly detached from the numbers. 3 years ago, this wealth would have seemed like validation, proof that he'd won, that his choices had been justified. Now it just felt like compensation for work done, capital to fund the next phase of growth. Does it feel different than you expected? Ariana asked, following his gaze to the stock ticker. Everything feels different than I expected, Sebastian admitted. I thought reaching this point would feel like triumph. Instead, it mostly feels like relief that we didn't destroy everything along the way. That's probably healthier than triumphalism, Ariana said. Though I wouldn't mind feeling a little triumphant. We earned this. We did, Sebastian agreed. You especially. Your code, your architecture, your technical leadership, that's what made this possible. Ariana tilted her head, studying him. You're not going to try to claim half credit for the algorithm anymore? I'm trying to claim appropriate credit for what I actually contributed, Sebastian corrected. Business development, client relationships, operational scaling, that work mattered too. But the technical innovation was yours. I'm finally comfortable saying that publicly. Character growth looks good on you, Ariana said with a slight smile. Who knew accountability could be so attractive? There was something in her tone that made Sebastian pause. Not flirtation exactly, but a warmth that hadn't been there in their earlier interactions. He wondered if 10 months of successful collaboration had shifted something between them, if rebuilding professional trust had created space for personal connection to grow again. Then he remembered Maya, the birthday party, the divorce papers, the 3 years of lies that had destroyed their marriage. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. He and Ariana had found their way to effective partnership. Wanting more would be greedy and foolish. We should get back, Sebastian said, standing and adjusting his jacket. Still have 3 more interviews before the market closes. If Ariana noticed the deflection, she didn't comment on it. They returned to the media gauntlet, presenting unified leadership and collaborative success until the closing bell rang at 4 o'clock. Logistream's first day as a public company ended with the stock at $64 per share, a 21% gain that exceeded every analyst's projection. The financial press declared it one of the most successful tech IPOs of the year. Industry observers praised the company's innovative technology and unusual co-leadership structure. That evening, Dominic hosted a private celebration at his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The guest list was selective. Board members, key executives, the engineers who'd built Logistream's core technology, and a few close allies who'd supported the company through its turbulent growth. Sebastian arrived to find the party already in full swing. Marcus was deep in conversation with Patricia about next quarter's financial projections. David Chen was demonstrating something technical to a cluster of engineers using a napkin and a borrowed pen. And Ariana stood near the windows talking with Dominic, both of them laughing at something Sebastian couldn't hear. He grabbed a glass of champagne and made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and deflecting questions about what came next. The truth was, he didn't know what came next. Logistream would continue growing, would face new challenges and opportunities, would require the same collaborative leadership that had brought them to this point. But beyond the company, beyond the work, Sebastian's future felt uncertain in ways he couldn't quite articulate. "You're brooding," Ariana said, appearing beside him with her own champagne. "On the day we became billionaires, you're standing in the corner brooding." "Not brooding," Sebastian protested. "Contemplating. That's just brooding with better vocabulary." She gestured toward the windows. "Come on. Dominic wants to make a toast." They joined the group gathering near the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the park and city beyond. Dominic waited until he had everyone's attention before raising his glass. Today, Logistream joined the public markets and exceeded every expectation, the billionaire began. But this celebration isn't really about stock prices or market capitalization. It's about what this company represents: the power of collaboration over individual ego, the importance of truth over mythology, the possibility of redemption through honest accountability. He looked directly at Sebastian and Ariana. A year ago, this company was built on a lie. One founder had claimed credit for innovation created by another. The foundation was rotten, and it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. What saved Logistream wasn't legal maneuvering or PR management. It was two people choosing truth over comfort, choosing collaboration over competition, choosing to build something real rather than maintain something hollow. Dominic raised his glass higher. To Sebastian and Ariana, to partnership that was destroyed and rebuilt stronger, to the courage it takes to acknowledge mistakes and the discipline it takes to actually change, and to the company you've built together, may it continue to grow on the foundation of integrity you've established. The room erupted in applause and raised glasses. Sebastian felt emotion tightening his throat as he met Ariana's eyes across the rim of his champagne flute. She smiled at him with something that looked like forgiveness, or perhaps something more, acceptance of who they'd both become through this painful process. As the party continued around them, Ariana gestured toward the terrace. "Want some air?" They stepped outside into October evening coolness, leaving the celebration behind. The city stretched out below them, millions of lights marking millions of lives, most of them completely unaware that Logistream existed, or that two former partners had spent the past year rebuilding what betrayal had destroyed. "Can I ask you something personal?" Ariana said after a moment of comfortable silence. "Now I'm nervous," Sebastian replied, trying for lightness. "Do you regret it? Not the lying or the stolen credit. I know you regret that. But do you regret us? The marriage, the partnership, everything that happened before it all went wrong?" Sebastian considered the question seriously. "I regret how it ended. I regret the choices I made that destroyed something good. But the relationship itself, being married to you, building the company together, those early days when we were just two people crazy enough to think we could change an industry?" He shook his head. "I don't regret that. Those were some of the best years of my life. Even though it all fell apart?" "Maybe especially because it fell apart," Sebastian said. "Because hitting rock bottom, facing what I'd done, rebuilding from honesty instead of mythology, that forced me to become someone better than who I was. Someone I actually respect." Ariana leaned against the terrace railing, her profile silhouetted against the city lights. "I spent 3 years hating you. Hating what you'd done, hating how you'd erased me, hating that you'd taken something we built together and made it about your personal glory." She paused. "But watching you change this past year, seeing you actually grow and learn and become someone capable of real partnership, I don't hate you anymore." "That's progress," Sebastian said carefully. "It's more than progress," Ariana corrected. "It's recognition that people can change if they're willing to do the work. You did the work, Sebastian. You acknowledged your mistakes publicly. You deferred to my expertise even when your ego screamed against it. You shared credit genuinely rather than performatively. You became a real partner instead of a solo performer pretending at collaboration." She turned to face him fully. "I'm proud of you, for who you've become. And I'm proud of us for finding our way back to something functional and maybe even meaningful." Sebastian felt something shift in his chest, some long frozen grief beginning to thaw. "Does this mean you forgive me?" "It means I'm working toward forgiveness," Ariana said. "It means I see your effort and your growth and your genuine change. It means I trust you professionally in ways I never thought I would again." She hesitated. Whether that ever extends beyond professional trust, I don't know yet. We've rebuilt the partnership. Whether we can rebuild anything personal is still an open question. It was more than Sebastian had dared hope for, and less than some buried part of him wanted. But it was honest, and honesty had become the currency he valued most. "I'll take that," he said. "Professional trust and the possibility of more. That's more than I deserve." "Maybe," Ariana agreed. but it's what you've earned through actual change rather than what you claimed through deception. There's a difference. They stood together on the terrace as the party continued inside, two people who'd destroyed each other and somehow found their way to something resembling peace. It wasn't the ending Sebastian had imagined 3 years ago when he'd been building mythology and claiming glory, but it was real and sustainable and built on truth. Eventually, they returned to the celebration. The party lasted until nearly midnight, with Dominic holding court and sharing stories about other companies he'd invested in, other founders who'd faced similar challenges of ego and collaboration. Marcus got progressively more animated about financial projections. The engineering team debated technical architecture with the passionate intensity of people who loved their work. Sebastian found himself watching Ariana throughout the evening, how she moved through conversations with quiet confidence, how people gravitated toward her expertise, how she'd stepped into her role as Logistream's technical leader with the authority she'd always deserved. This was who she was meant to be, unencumbered by his need to be the singular hero, finally receiving recognition for brilliance that had always been there. Near the end of the evening, as guests began departing and thanking Dominic for his hospitality, Sebastian pulled Marcus aside. "I need you to do something for me," he said quietly. "Name it." "Set up a foundation, education-focused, specifically supporting women in computer science and engineering. Initial funding of $50 million from my personal equity." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "That's generous. What brought this on?" "I spent 3 years claiming credit for a woman's innovation while the industry celebrated me and ignored her," Sebastian said. "I can't undo that damage, but I can help make sure future brilliant women don't get erased the way Ariana was, that their contributions get recognized, their voices get amplified, their genius gets celebrated rather than stolen." "This is good," Marcus said approvingly, "turning redemption into action. I'll have paperwork ready by next week." Sebastian thanked him and turned to find Ariana standing nearby, having clearly overheard at least part of the conversation. "A foundation?" she asked. "Seemed like the right thing to do," Sebastian said. "Using wealth I gained partly through your work to support women whose work might otherwise be overlooked. It's not enough, but it's something." "It's more than something," Ariana said softly. "It's accountability translated into action. It's using privilege gained through theft to create opportunity for others." She paused. "I want to match it. $50 million from my equity too. We build it together, equal partners in trying to fix the system that enabled what you did to me." Sebastian felt gratitude wash over him. "You don't have to—" "I want to," Ariana interrupted. "Not to absolve you or to signal that everything's forgiven, but because you're right. The industry has a problem with erasing women's contributions. We're in position to do something about it, so let's do it together." They shook on it there in Dominic's penthouse, committing $100 million to supporting women whose brilliance might otherwise be claimed by ambitious men. It wasn't redemption. That would take years, maybe decades of sustained effort, but it was a start. The party finally ended near 1 in the morning. Sebastian and Ariana shared a car back to Manhattan, both of them exhausted from the emotional intensity of the day. "What happens now?" Sebastian asked as they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge with the city lights reflected in the dark water below. "We run the company," Ariana said. "We continue building. We navigate being a public company with all the scrutiny and pressure that brings. We keep learning to collaborate effectively even when it's difficult." "That's the professional answer. What about personally?" Ariana was quiet for a long moment. "Personally, I think we keep rebuilding trust. We see if professional partnership can evolve into genuine friendship. We stay open to possibility without forcing anything." She looked at him directly. "We've both changed, Sebastian. I'm not the same person who married you 8 years ago. You're not the same person who betrayed me 3 years ago. Maybe that creates space for something new. Or maybe we're meant to be excellent business partners and nothing more. Either way, we build from honesty." It was a perfectly Ariana answer, thoughtful, balanced, refusing to promise more than she could deliver. Sebastian found comfort in her measured approach. "I can work with that," he said. The car dropped Ariana at her apartment first. She paused before getting out, turning back to face Sebastian. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for this year, for becoming someone I can actually partner with." "Thank you for giving me the chance," Sebastian replied. foreseeing potential for growth instead of just condemning the mistakes. She smiled, squeezed his hand briefly, and disappeared into her building. Sebastian continued to his own apartment, his mind full of the day's events and the future's possibilities. Over the following months, Logistream settled into its new reality as a public company. The stock price stabilized after its initial surge, finding equilibrium around $70 per share. The engineering team continued optimizing the platform. New clients signed on. The acquired companies integrated successfully into the broader ecosystem. Sebastian and Ariana developed a rhythm of collaboration that felt increasingly natural. They still disagreed regularly about priorities, timelines, resource allocation, but they'd learned to argue productively and resolve conflicts based on evidence rather than ego. The foundation launched in January with significant press coverage. Applications flooded in from talented women pursuing computer science degrees who needed financial support. The first cohort of recipients was announced in March, 20 brilliant students who would receive full scholarships plus mentorship from industry leaders. At the award ceremony, Ariana gave a speech about her own experience being erased, about the importance of recognition and visibility, about the responsibility of those with platforms to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. Sebastian watched from the audience, feeling pride that had nothing to do with his own accomplishments and everything to do with witnessing someone extraordinary using their voice to create change. In April, nearly 18 months after Ariana had walked back into his life and dismantled his mythology, Sebastian received an unexpected invitation. A major tech conference wanted both him and Ariana to keynote together, not about Logistream's business success, but about their journey from betrayal to collaboration, from stolen credit to honest partnership. Sebastian's first instinct was to decline. Who wanted to stand on stage and discuss their worst mistakes in front of thousands of people? But Ariana surprised him by accepting immediately. "This is exactly the kind of story the industry needs to hear," she told him when he expressed reluctance. Not the mythology of singular genius, but the reality of collaboration and the consequences of erasure and the possibility of redemption through accountability. If we can help even one founder reconsider claiming sole credit for collaborative work, it's worth the discomfort. So they flew to San Francisco in June and stood together on stage in front of 3,000 conference attendees, telling their story with unflinching honesty. Sebastian talked about the pressure to be a singular visionary, about the shortcuts he'd taken with attribution, about the mythology he'd built and the damage it had caused. Ariana discussed the experience of being erased, the long path to reclaiming her work, the complexity of rebuilding partnership with someone who'd betrayed her. The audience was silent throughout, hanging on every word. When they opened for questions, hands shot up across the auditorium. "How do you work together now without resentment destroying everything?" one founder asked. "We acknowledge that resentment exists," Ariana replied. "We don't pretend the betrayal didn't happen or that everything's magically fine now, but we've learned to separate personal feelings from professional collaboration, to focus on shared goals rather than past grievances." "What would you tell founders who are tempted to take sole credit for collaborative work?" another questioner asked. Sebastian leaned toward the microphone. "I'd tell them it's not worth it. The mythology feels good temporarily, but it's hollow. Real satisfaction comes from building something sustainable with people you genuinely respect. Stolen credit is just borrowed glory. Eventually, the bill comes due." The keynote received a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of founders and executives approached them privately, sharing their own stories of attribution struggles, of partnership conflicts, of the pressure to be singular heroes in an industry that celebrated individual genius over collaborative innovation. Flying back to New York that evening, Sebastian felt something he hadn't experienced since before the lies began: genuine peace with who he was and what he'd built. "That felt good," he said to Ariana as they settled into their first-class seats. "Telling the truth publicly, using our story to maybe prevent others from making the same mistakes." "It felt like purpose," Ariana agreed. "Like all the pain and conflict and rebuilding might actually mean something beyond just our personal journey." She pulled out her laptop to review code, and Sebastian found himself studying her profile in the dim cabin light. Somewhere over the past 18 months, his feelings toward her had evolved from guilt and defensiveness to respect and admiration to something deeper he couldn't quite name. Not romantic love, that bridge had burned too thoroughly, but perhaps something more profound. Partnership that had been tested beyond breaking and somehow held. Trust that had been destroyed and painstakingly rebuilt. Collaboration that had evolved from transactional necessity into genuine connection. What? Ariana asked, noticing his attention. Just thinking about how far we've come, Sebastian said. From that birthday party where you destroyed my mythology to this, partners again, building something real. Partners, Ariana agreed, though maybe better partners than we were before, because we're not trying to be anything other than what we actually are. What are we? Sebastian asked. Ariana considered the question. Two imperfect people who made terrible mistakes and somehow found their way to something functional and maybe even good. Two founders who learned that collaboration requires honesty and that real success is built on truth rather than mythology. She smiled. And maybe, eventually, two friends who can look back on all of this and recognize that the struggle made us both better. I like that version, Sebastian said. Me too, Ariana replied, and she reached across the armrest to squeeze his hand briefly before returning to her code review. Logistream's second year as a public company exceeded every projection. Revenue grew by 60%. The platform expanded to serve clients in 12 countries. The engineering team built innovations that pushed the technology beyond what even Ariana had initially envisioned. And through it all, Sebastian and Ariana led together, sharing credit honestly, collaborating effectively, building something extraordinary on a foundation of truth. On the anniversary of their IPO, they stood together on the same stock exchange podium where they'd rung the opening bell 18 months earlier. This time, they were there to celebrate hitting major milestones, sustained profitability, international expansion, revolutionary technological advancement. A year ago, Sebastian told the assembled journalists and investors, I said that Logistream was built on honest collaboration. Today, I can say that honesty has proven more valuable than any mythology we could have manufactured. This company succeeds because brilliant people are given proper credit for their work, because innovation is celebrated regardless of whose name is attached, because we've learned that the strongest foundation is truth. Ariana took the microphone next. Sebastian and I have an unusual partnership. We've been married, divorced, enemies, and collaborators. We've destroyed each other and rebuilt something functional from the wreckage. And through it all, we've learned that great companies aren't built by singular geniuses. They're built by teams of talented people who respect each other's contributions and share credit honestly. She paused, looking at Sebastian with warmth. I'm proud of what we've built. Not just the company, but the partnership that makes it possible. The press conference ended with questions about future growth, international expansion, and technological roadmap. But Sebastian barely heard them. He was too focused on what Ariana had said, that she was proud of their partnership, proud of what they'd built together. It wasn't romantic reconciliation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where betrayal was magically forgiven and everything returned to how it had been. But it was real and honest and built on mutual respect that had been earned through sustained effort rather than claimed through mythology. That evening, Dominic invited them both to dinner at the same Tribeca restaurant where he'd first proposed his aggressive growth plan. Over wine and excellent food, the billionaire reflected on Logistream's journey. When I first invested, Dominic said, I wasn't sure if you two could actually work together. The betrayal was so profound, the hurt so deep, but you've both shown remarkable capacity for growth. Sebastian, you've learned humility and accountability. Ariana, you've learned to give second chances while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Together, you've built something that will outlast both of you. That's the goal, Ariana said, to create something bigger than our personal drama, something that matters beyond just our own success. You've succeeded, Dominic assured her. Logistream will be studied in business schools as an example of effective co-leadership and the importance of proper attribution. Your foundation will support hundreds of women whose contributions might otherwise be erased, and your personal journey from betrayal to collaboration will inspire founders facing similar challenges. He raised his glass, to lasting impact built on truth rather than mythology. They toasted to that, to truth and collaboration and the possibility of redemption through sustained effort. Later that night, Walking through Manhattan streets with Ariana after dinner, Sebastian felt the culmination of everything they'd rebuilt over the past 2 years. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd never claimed sole credit?" he asked. "If we'd presented as partners from the beginning?" "Sometimes," Ariana admitted, "but I think we both needed this journey. You needed to learn that mythology is hollow and that real satisfaction comes from honest collaboration. I needed to learn that I'm capable of reclaiming what's mine, that invisibility is a choice rather than destiny." She looked at him thoughtfully. "We're both better for having gone through this, even though it was painful." "Are we friends now?" Sebastian asked. "Or just effective business partners?" Ariana smiled. "We're whatever we are. We don't need to define it or force it into familiar categories. We're two people who hurt each other badly and found our way to something functional and respectful. If that evolves into friendship, wonderful. If it stays professional, that's fine too. We build from where we actually are rather than where we think we should be." It was perfectly Ariana, refusing to oversimplify, insisting on honesty even about the nature of their relationship. Sebastian had learned to appreciate that about her, the way she demanded truth in everything. They reached Ariana's building first. She paused at the entrance, and for a moment Sebastian wondered if she might invite him up. Not for romance, that ship had sailed, but for conversation, for the kind of late-night discussion they used to have in the warehouse when they were building their dreams together. Instead, she simply smiled and said, "Thank you for dinner, and for everything else, for growing, for changing, for becoming someone I can actually build with." "Thank you for giving me the chance," Sebastian replied, "for seeing potential instead of just condemning the mistakes." She squeezed his hand once, warmly, and disappeared into her building. Sebastian walked the remaining blocks to his own apartment, his mind full of gratitude and possibility. He'd started this journey as a man who'd built an empire on stolen credit, who'd measured success by mythology rather than truth. He was ending it as someone who understood that real achievement required honesty, that collaboration was stronger than solo performance, that the hardest work was becoming someone worthy of partnership. The empire he'd imagined 3 years ago had been built on lies. The company he led now was built on truth. And while truth was harder, messier, and required constant accountability, it was also sustainable, meaningful, and genuinely his to celebrate. Logistream continued growing over the following years, expanding into new markets and developing innovations that transformed logistics globally. Sebastian and Ariana remained co-leaders, their partnership evolving from fractious collaboration into genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The foundation they'd created together supported hundreds of women in technology, amplifying voices that might otherwise have been overlooked. Some of those women went on to found their own companies, to lead engineering teams, to create innovations that pushed entire industries forward, and they did it with proper attribution, with recognized credit, with the visibility that Ariana had been denied and fought to reclaim. Sebastian never claimed sole credit again. He learned to say we instead of I, to redirect praise to the teams who did the actual work, to celebrate collaboration rather than performing singular genius. It became second nature eventually, more genuine than any mythology he'd manufactured. And Ariana, for her part, stepped fully into her role as one of the industry's most brilliant technical minds. She gave keynotes about algorithmic innovation, published papers on predictive modeling, mentored young engineers who looked to her as an example of what was possible when talent met opportunity, met proper recognition. On the 5th anniversary of Logistream's IPO, they stood together one final time on the stock exchange floor, ringing the closing bell to commemorate sustained success built on honest foundation. The company's market capitalization had reached $8 billion. Their foundation had supported over 300 women in technology. Their partnership had become the industry standard for effective co-leadership. As the closing bell rang and traders applauded, Sebastian looked at Ariana and saw not his ex-wife or his former victim or his business partner, but simply someone extraordinary who'd given him a second chance when he deserved none. Someone who taught him that truth was stronger than mythology, that collaboration was more satisfying than solo performance, that real success meant building something that outlasted personal ego. "Thank you," he said quietly, knowing she'd hear him despite the noise. "For everything, for coming back, for giving me a chance to become someone better." Ariana smiled, that warm, genuine expression he'd learned to treasure over 5 years of rebuilt partnership. Thank you for actually becoming that person, for doing the work instead of just performing redemption. They left the stock exchange together, walking into Manhattan evening light. Two people who'd destroyed each other and rebuilt something better from the wreckage. It wasn't the ending Sebastian had imagined when he'd first claimed credit for Ariana's code, but it was real and honest and built to last. And in the end, that mattered more than any empire built on lies. The woman he'd tried to erase had become his greatest teacher, his strongest partner, and his path to redemption. She'd reclaimed what was hers not through destruction, but through the patient, difficult work of demanding truth and building something meaningful from honesty. Sebastian had learned that the hardest battles weren't won through mythology or performance, but through the unglamorous work of becoming genuinely worthy of partnership, of earning back trust through sustained effort, of building something real rather than maintaining something hollow. And standing beside Ariana as the sun set over the city they'd conquered together, Sebastian finally understood what he'd been searching for all along. Not glory, not recognition, not the mythology of singular genius, but partnership, truth, and the deep satisfaction of building something extraordinary with someone he genuinely respected. That was the real victory. And for the first time in years, Sebastian smiled without reservation, knowing he'd finally won something worth having.